Section 1. The Town That Time Forgot. There is a town in America where nobody ages. The children have been children for 36 years. The parents have been parents for 36 years. The old men have been old. The babies have been babies. The dog is the same dog. The house is the same house. The car in the driveway is the same car, and the beer in the fridge is always cold, and the lamp in the living room throws the same warm light it has been throwing since December of 1989. The town is called Springfield. And tonight, as you settle in and let the world outside go quiet, we are going to spend some time there. We are going to walk its impossible streets and sit with its impossible people and ask the questions that nobody inside its borders has ever thought to ask. We are going to look at the mysteries buried inside the longest-running animated series in the history of American television and hold them up to the light, one by one, and turn them slowly and see what they look like from different angles. Some of these mysteries have official answers. The show committed to those answers, the writers signed off on them, and the studio moved on. But the official answers have always had loose threads. And if you pull on those threads gently, the way you pull on a thread in an old sweater, things begin to unravel in ways that nobody planned for. Behind the jokes and the couch gags and the chalkboard openings and the 36 seasons of comedy, there is a stranger version of Springfield than the one you grew up watching. Darker in places, sadder in others, and in some ways, far more beautiful than the surface version lets on. So get comfortable, breathe slowly, let your shoulders drop. This is not a race. We are going to take our time in Springfield tonight. The Simpsons premiered on the 17th of December 1989. The episode was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, and it was a Christmas special about a family who couldn't afford presents. Homer worked a second job as a mall Santa. He bet the family's Christmas money on a greyhound racing dog. He lost. Then he adopted the dog. The family laughed. It was warm and funny and just a little bit sad. And it ended with everyone okay, which is how most Simpsons episodes have always ended. That first episode established something that the show has maintained ever since, and that is a very specific feeling. The feeling that no matter how chaotic things get, no matter how many disasters pile up, no matter how many things go wrong in the most spectacular and improbable ways, everything is going to be fine by the time the credits roll. The family will be on the couch. The house will be standing. Tomorrow will come, and Homer will go back to work, and Bart will go back to school, and Marge will hold everything together through some combination of patience and willpower that the show never fully explains but always depends on. That feeling is the foundation of everything. And it is also, if you look at it closely enough, one of the deepest mysteries the show has ever posed. Because The Simpsons have been fine for 36 years, through things that should not leave people fine, through disasters and catastrophes and near extinctions of the town itself, through a nuclear meltdown that was averted at the last second, through a dome that the federal government sealed over the entire town because the pollution had become so severe that containment was the only option, through a comet, through multiple mob invasions, through Homer eating himself into a medical crisis so many times that Springfield General Hospital should have a wing named after him. And every single time by the next episode, everything is fine. The slate is wiped. The town is restored. The family is on the couch. Nobody mentions what happened last week. For most of the show's run, audiences have accepted this as a feature of animated television. Long-running cartoons reset. Characters don't age. Consequences don't accumulate. That's just how the format works. You watch the episode, you laugh, you move on, and next week the Simpsons are ready for a fresh adventure with no memory of the last one. But here is the thing about 36 years of storytelling. When a show runs long enough, the accumulated weight of all those resets starts to become something else. It stops looking like a stylistic choice and starts looking like a symptom. Because at a certain point, the question stops being, why do these characters keep bouncing back, and starts being, why are they not allowed to change? That question is the one we are going to spend tonight with. Why can't Springfield change? Who or what is keeping it frozen? And what does it say about us that we have been watching it freeze for 36 years and mostly felt comforted by it? Let's start with the physical reality of Springfield, because it is more unusual than it appears. The town has a nuclear power plant. It has a tire fire that has been burning for as long as anyone can remember, and which nobody has ever successfully extinguished, and which nobody seems particularly bothered by. It has a gorge that residents have been jumping into for decades, not always voluntarily. It has a harbor, and a mountain range, and an ocean within driving distance, and a desert somewhere nearby, and forests and farmland and a downtown district, and a suburban sprawl that somehow contain all of these geographic features within the same loosely defined borders. This is, if you have ever looked at a map of the United States, not possible. No single location in America has all of those things in close proximity. Mountains and deserts exist in different parts of the country from harbors and oceans. Farmland and forests don't typically share a region with active volcanoes, which Springfield has also apparently hosted at various points. Springfield is not a real place. This is known, but within the logic of the show, within the internal reality that the characters inhabit, it is presented as a place with consistent physical laws. Characters drive from point A to point B. They experience weather. They live in houses that have addresses. The geography is impossible, but the show presents it as real, and the characters navigate it as though it makes sense. So why doesn't it make sense? We will come back to that question in a later section, because the answer is more interesting than it might seem. For now, let's just note that Springfield's physical reality is already a little broken before we even get to the people who live in it. And the people are where things get genuinely strange. Homer Simpson, the father, the protagonist, the safety inspector at a nuclear facility who has an IQ that the show's own creator has placed at approximately 55. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His skull, as depicted in several cross-section drawings the show has offered over the years, contains a brain that occupies a disturbingly small portion of the available space, leaving the rest of the cavity available for things like a crayon, which, as the show reveals in a season 12 episode, has been lodged in his prefrontal cortex since childhood. His eyes bulge slightly. His overbite is pronounced. He has survived, in the course of the show's run, being shot, being electrocuted, falling off a cliff, being run over by multiple vehicles, being mauled by a bear, falling down Springfield Gorge twice, being launched through space, and eating a level of food that would have constituted a medical emergency for any real human being thousands of times over. He heals from everything, he recovers from everything, he survives everything. And every Monday morning in Springfield, he gets up and drives to work, and sits in front of his console and sometimes falls asleep there, and the nuclear plant hums along around him, and everything is fine. Marge Simpson, the mother, the stabilizing center of the family. She has the same bulging eyes as her husband, the same 4 fingers, and hair that defies physics by growing straight up in a tower that she has maintained in precisely the same shape for the entirety of the show's run, through weather and water and sleep, apparently without structural support of any kind. She is patient to a degree that the show sometimes frames as saintly and sometimes as quietly heartbreaking. She absorbs an enormous amount of stress and converts it into calm. And the mechanism by which she does this is never examined in any sustained way, because to examine it would be to look directly at how much she carries, and that would be a different kind of show entirely. Bart Simpson, 10 years old, and has been 10 years old for 3.5 decades. Rebellious, restless, funny, and occasionally, in the quieter moments the show allows itself, genuinely tender. He is the kid who gets in trouble and feels bad about it afterward, most of the time. The kid who pushes against every boundary but understands, somewhere underneath the chaos, that the boundaries exist because someone loves him enough to draw them. Lisa Simpson, 8 years old, and has been 8 years old for 3.5 decades. The most intellectually capable member of her family, and possibly of her town, by a considerable margin. A saxophone player, an environmentalist, a Buddhist, a feminist, a vegetarian, and a perpetual outsider in a community that has never quite known what to do with someone who thinks as hard as she does. She keeps asking questions. Nobody answers them. She asks anyway. Maggie Simpson, 1-year-old, has been 1-year-old for 3.5 decades, does not speak, watches everything. These 5 people have been on television screens in American living rooms since before most of the show's current audience was born. They have become so familiar, so embedded in the cultural landscape, that their presence feels less like fiction and more like a fact of life. The Simpsons exist the way mountains exist, or the way certain songs exist. You don't remember encountering them for the first time because they seem to have always been there. And that familiarity, that deep, comfortable recognition, is actually one of the reasons the mysteries are so easy to miss. When something is familiar enough, you stop looking at it. You stop asking what it actually is and start just accepting that it is. The yellow skin stops being strange. The four fingers stop being strange. Homer's impossible resilience stops being strange. You've seen it 1,000 times, and 1,000 times nothing bad ultimately happened, so you file it under normal and move on. But tonight we are not filing anything under normal. Tonight we are looking. The show has spent 36 seasons accumulating detail. Not all of it is consistent. Not all of it points in the same direction. But enough of it, when you gather it together and lay it out carefully, begins to suggest something. Something that the show has never stated outright, because stating it outright would break the spell. Would turn the couch gag into a suicide note. Would turn the yellow skin into a diagnosis. The show knows what it's doing. It has always known. It drops the detail and then moves on, because moving on is what keeps the loop running. But the detail is there, and the detail accumulates, and if you are the kind of person who looks at a three-eyed fish and starts wondering what's in the water, you are the right kind of person to spend an evening in Springfield. So let's go deeper. Over the next several hours, we are going to walk through the major mysteries of this show. The ones that have official answers that don't quite satisfy. The ones that have no official answers at all. The ones that, when you connect them to each other, start to suggest a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more complex than the version the show presents every Sunday night at 8. We are going to talk about radiation. About a man who may have been dreaming for 30 years. About a shooting that was officially solved and almost certainly wasn't. About an employer who should have died a century ago and hasn't. About a mother who vanished and the damage that damage did across 3 generations. About a baby who says nothing and understands everything. About a town that voted to make truth illegal. About a location that can't be found on any map. And at the end, we are going to talk about why we keep watching. Why, after 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, we keep going back to Springfield. Why the loop feels comfortable rather than claustrophobic. Why we have chosen, like the residents of Springfield themselves, to accept the impossible as ordinary. Because maybe that choice is the deepest mystery of all. Breathe slowly. Let the outside world get a little quieter. There is no rush here. Springfield will be exactly the same when we get there as it always has been. That is, depending on how you look at it, either very comforting or very troubling. Probably both. If you're still with us, drop your time and location in the comments below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are a lot more nights like this one ahead. Section 2. The Nuclear Secret Hiding in Plain Sight. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility that sits on the edge of town like a monument to something the town has collectively decided not to look at directly. It has 2 cooling towers. The towers are cracked. The cracks were, at one point, patched with chewing gum. This is not a metaphor. An actual safety inspection found this, among 342 other violations, which is a number so large that if you listed every violation on a separate piece of paper and stacked those papers in a pile, the pile would be taller than a man. The estimated cost to address all of those violations at the time of inspection was $56 million. The plant's owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, declined to spend it. Not because he couldn't. Burns is one of the wealthiest characters in the history of American fiction, a billionaire many times over whose fortune predates most living institutions and whose relationship with money is less about what he can afford and more about what he chooses to acknowledge. He declined to fix the violations because fixing them would mean admitting they existed, and admitting they existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what they had already done to the people living in the town below those cracked and weeping cooling towers. Nobody has asked those questions. Not seriously. Not in a way that led to change. And tonight, in the quiet of this hour, we are going to ask them. The radiation contamination theory is one of the oldest and most well-supported frameworks for understanding Springfield. It is not, despite what the word theory might imply, speculative in the way that most theories are. It is grounded in things the show has explicitly depicted, directly stated, and returned to across dozens of episodes spanning nearly 4 decades. The theory doesn't require you to read between the lines. It requires you to read the lines that are already there. Let's begin with Blinky. Blinky appeared in Season 2, in an episode called Two Cars in Every Garage and Three Eyes on Every Fish. Bart catches a fish in the river near the nuclear plant. The fish has three eyes, not two, the way fish have. Three. A third eye growing from the side of its head, functional and glassy and absolutely real within the show's world. This immediately becomes national news. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as the centerpiece of a campaign against Burns, arguing that the fish is living proof that the power plant is poisoning the environment. Burns, under pressure, invites the candidate and the press to dinner and eats the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is perfectly safe to consume. The candidate loses. Burns wins the news cycle. Springfield moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody commissions a follow-up study on the fish population. Nobody asks the single most obvious question available to them, which is this: if the radiation from the power plant has given the fish in the local river a third eye, what has it done to the people drinking water from the same source? The show poses this question and then retreats from it, the way it always retreats from its most uncomfortable implications. But the question stays. It sits there in the riverbank mud with Blinky's three-eyed gaze, and the longer you look at it, the harder it becomes to look away. Because the show has been answering it, quietly, in the background, for 36 years. Look at Homer Simpson's body. He has 4 fingers on each hand. Every character in Springfield has 4 fingers on each hand, and the standard explanation is that this is an animation convention. Drawing 4 fingers is easier than drawing 5. It saves time. It's a stylistic shortcut. This is true as far as it goes. But the show has always drawn its human characters somewhat differently from the way it draws visitors to Springfield from outside the town. Celebrity guest characters, characters who arrive from elsewhere and represent the wider world beyond Springfield's borders, have often been depicted with proportions slightly closer to naturalistic human anatomy. Their eyes are less exaggerated. Their features are more grounded. The difference is subtle in some cases and more pronounced in others, but it is consistent enough that fans have noticed it and documented it extensively. Within the reality the show has built, there is a visual distinction between people who live in Springfield and people who don't. The people who live in Springfield look like Springfield people. The people who come from outside look different. If you accept that distinction as meaningful rather than stylistic, then the question becomes, what made Springfield people look that way? The show tells you. It told you in Season 2 with a fish that has 3 eyes. It has been telling you ever since with a population that exhibits physical characteristics, the yellow skin, the bulging eyes, the unusual skull formations, the extraordinary resilience to injury, that don't appear in the populations of the cities those visiting celebrities come from. Homer's healing rate deserves special attention here. In the course of the show's run, Homer has been shot. He has fallen from considerable heights. He has been electrocuted. He has been struck by moving vehicles. He has been in explosions. He has experienced physical trauma that would leave a normal human being permanently disabled or dead, and he has recovered from all of it with a speed and completeness that has no biological basis in normal human physiology. This is, in the conventional reading, simply cartoon logic. Characters in animated shows don't die from things that would kill real people. It's a feature of the format. But the radiation theory proposes something more specific. It proposes that Homer's body has been altered at the cellular level by decades of exposure to radiation from a facility that has been leaking since before he started working there. That his remarkable recovery ability is not cartoon physics but mutation. That his body's capacity to absorb and recover from damage is what happens to an organism that has spent its entire life in a low-grade radioactive environment. And the show has actually supported this interpretation directly. In Season 8, there is an episode called The Springfield Files. Homer sees something in the woods near Springfield and becomes convinced it is an alien. The FBI sends agents Mulder and Scully from the X-Files to investigate. The town becomes consumed by alien fever, and then the truth is revealed. The figure in the woods is not an alien, it is Mr. Burns. Burns, the episode explains, undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive and so chemically extreme that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, his body would fail. After each session, he walks out of the treatment facility in a dazed, blissful state, wandering through the woods behind the plant, glowing softly in the dark. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the forest, and their first instinct is extraterrestrial visitor, not radiation. Not the power plant that dominates their skyline and employs a significant portion of their population. An alien. The depth of the denial required to look at a glowing man walking out of the woods behind a nuclear plant and conclude alien is, once you notice it, genuinely staggering. These are not stupid people reacting to something they have never encountered before. These are people who live next to a nuclear plant, who have seen a three-eyed fish, who work in the facility, who drink the water, and their explanation for a glowing human being is that he came from another planet. Burns knew what was happening in that town. The show makes this clear across multiple episodes. He has personal physicians, he funds private research, he undergoes those weekly treatments that keep his own radiation-saturated body functional. He understands, better than anyone in Springfield, what chronic radiation exposure does to biological systems, because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body. He knows what the plant is doing to the town. He has always known. Consider the economics of what Burns has built. The nuclear plant is Springfield's primary power source. The town depends on it for electricity. The town depends on Burns for the jobs the plant provides. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population. This creates a dependency that goes beyond convenience. It creates a situation in which challenging Burns, or challenging the plant, or demanding accountability for the contamination becomes economically suicidal for the community. You cannot bite the hand that powers the lights. And Burns is not passive about this dependency. He has cultivated it. He has structured the town's economy around the plant deliberately, in ways that ensure that even when the contamination becomes undeniable, the population's survival instinct overrides its sense of outrage. Homer's employment is the most explicit example of this. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector for Sector 7G of the Springfield nuclear power plant. His job, stated plainly, is to ensure that the facility does not poison the surrounding population. He is the single human being whose professional responsibility is to stand between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. He sleeps at his workstation. He has eaten donuts during meltdown warnings. The show's creator has stated his IQ at 55, and Burns keeps him employed. When German investors purchased the plant briefly, the very first thing they did upon acquisition was fire Homer. The second thing they did was commission an assessment of what it would cost to bring the facility up to code. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns. Burns bought it back and immediately rehired Homer, a competent safety inspector, someone who actually understood the regulations and had the knowledge and the will to enforce them, would shut that plant down within days. The violations are too numerous, too severe, too fundamental to overlook for anyone who is actually paying attention. Homer is not paying attention. Homer has never been paying attention. And Burns, who understands exactly what a competent safety inspector would do to his operation, has spent decades ensuring that the inspector in Sector 7G is the least competent candidate available. This is not negligence. This is strategy. Now let's return to Homer's brain, because the crayon is important. In a Season 12 episode, Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since early childhood. The crayon is wedged in his prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex thinking, decision-making, and critical reasoning. A doctor removes it. Homer's IQ immediately climbs to a level described as genius range. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding the world around him with a clarity he has never experienced before. He sees Springfield for what it is. He sees his job for what it is. He understands the plant, he understands Burns. He understands the system he has been living inside, working within, sustaining, for his entire adult life. And it is unbearable. Intelligence, in Springfield, is not a gift, it is a curse. Because intelligence means seeing clearly, and seeing clearly in Springfield means understanding that the town is contaminated, and the employer is corrupt, and the water is poisoned, and the fish have 3 eyes for a reason, and nobody is coming to fix any of it. Homer chooses to have the crayon put back in. He chooses the fog. He chooses not to see. And the show presents this as a tragic comedy, a funny, sad moment in a funny, sad life. But under the radiation theory, it becomes something darker. Because the question the episode raises and then retreats from is this: how did a crayon end up lodged in a child's brain in the first place? Homer went to school. He went to the doctor. He received medical care in Springfield for his entire childhood. And not a single medical professional in the town found a foreign object in his skull. Either every doctor in Springfield is so catastrophically incompetent that a child could walk through their door with a crayon in his brain and leave with a clean bill of health, or the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised, bought, looking the other way. If Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, then it is possible that Homer's reduced cognitive function was not an accident, not a childhood incident that went undetected, but something that was detected, acknowledged, and deliberately left in place. Because a Homer Simpson without a crayon in his brain, with a functional prefrontal cortex, with the cognitive capacity to understand what he was seeing at work every day, was not the employee Burns needed in Sector 7G. The contaminated water, the leaking radiation, the cracked cooling towers, the 342 violations, the three-eyed fish, the glowing billionaire in the woods, all of it connects. All of it points to the same source. And at the center of it, sitting at a console he barely understands, in a room he often falls asleep in, with a crayon in his brain and radiation in his water and a paycheck with Charles Montgomery Burns' name at the top, is Homer Simpson. The most important person in Springfield's entire safety infrastructure, the man who least understands what safety means. The Simpsons movie brought this all to the surface in a way that could not be ignored. In the film, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a level so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the only appropriate response is to seal the entire town under a massive glass dome. Think about what that means. The federal government of the United States looked at a town and concluded that it was so toxic, so fundamentally contaminated, so dangerous to the surrounding environment, that physical containment was the only viable solution. Not cleanup, not remediation, not accountability for the party responsible. Containment. Springfield is quarantined like a biological hazard, like a wound that has to be sealed before it spreads. And every resident of the town, every person who has been drinking the water and breathing the air and living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers for decades, every single one of them is inside the dome when it goes up. The show plays much of this for laughs, because the show plays most things for laughs. That is what the show does. It takes something terrible and wraps it in comedy until the terrible part becomes easier to be in the presence of. But the terrible part is still there. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric cartoon characters expressing the quirks of animated logic. They are, within the framework the show has built across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, symptomatic. Their yellow skin, their bulging eyes, their four fingers, their extraordinary physical resilience, their cognitive impairments, their collective inability to look at their own town and recognize what is obviously wrong with it. These are the effects of long-term exposure to radiation from a facility that was built without adequate safeguards and operated without meaningful oversight for a generation. The nuclear power plant is not a background gag. It is the cause. Every yellow face, every three-eyed fish, every impossible recovery from fatal injury, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every case of collective amnesia that leaves the town unable to connect what happened last week to what is happening now. It all traces back to the same source, the same cracked structure leaking the same invisible damage into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that keep showing up for work and coming home and turning on the television and not asking why. The radiation theory doesn't explain one mystery about Springfield. It explains all of them. The residents don't age because something about their biology has been fundamentally altered. The town resets because the population's capacity for long-term memory and pattern recognition has been compromised. Homer survives the unsurvivable because his body has adapted to damage in ways that would be remarkable if anyone were paying close enough attention to notice. Burns stays alive through treatments that would kill anyone else because he has spent a century managing his own exposure with resources that nobody in Springfield has access to, and nobody questions any of it. Because the same thing that mutated their bodies has also done something to the part of their minds responsible for asking why. Springfield isn't a quirky town in an animated comedy. It is a slow emergency that has been ongoing for longer than the show has been on the air. And the most chilling thing about it is not the contamination itself. The most chilling thing is how comfortable it looks. From the outside, from the distance of a television screen in a darkened room, Springfield looks like a nice place to live. The houses are friendly. The neighbors wave. There is a church and a bar and an elementary school and a quickie mart open at all hours. There are community events and local sports teams and a mayor who shows up for ribbon cuttings, even when the thing being ribbon cut is probably a bad idea. It looks fine. It looks like home. And that, in the end, is the most frightening thing the radiation theory asks you to sit with. How would you know? If the damage were gradual enough, slow enough, ambient enough, woven into the water and the air and the food and the routine of daily life, how would you recognize it? You would not feel sick. You would not fall down. You would go to work and come home and watch television and fall asleep on the couch and wake up and do it again. And the fact that the fish in the river had 3 eyes would be a funny story you told once or twice and then stopped telling, because there was always something more pressing to deal with. The radiation theory works because it doesn't ask you to imagine something foreign. It asks you to look at something familiar and decide if you are sure, genuinely sure, that you would know the difference. Section 3. Homer's Coma and the Dream That Never Ended. On April 1st, 1993, Homer Simpson went into a coma. He woke up. That is what the show says. The episode ends with Homer strangling Bart and the family laughing and everything returning to normal. The coma was 7 weeks long. It was caused by a vending machine falling on Homer while he was recovering from an explosion caused by a beer can that had been placed inside an industrial paint shaker. The episode was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show, and it aired in the 18th episode of Season 4. The show tells you Homer woke up. But before you fully accept that, sit with a few details. In the final moments of that episode, Homer is informed that the coma has permanently destroyed 5% of his brain function. 5% gone, the doctors say. Not recoverable. Not replaceable. A portion of Homer Simpson's brain ceased to function during those 7 weeks and never came back. Homer's response to learning this is to laugh. He says he doesn't know why he's laughing, but he laughs anyway. The family finds this endearing. The episode ends. The Simpsons continues for 32 more years as though nothing happened. Unless nothing did happen. Unless Homer never actually woke up. The Homer coma theory is the most widely discussed, most elaborately supported, and most emotionally devastating fan theory in the history of this show. It has been debated on message boards and fan sites and Reddit threads for decades. It has been acknowledged by the show's writers. It has been denied by the show's executive producers. And it has refused to go away, because the evidence for it is not hidden in obscure background details or throwaway jokes. The evidence is in the structure of the show itself. Here is the basic claim. Homer Simpson did not wake up from his coma in April 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date is a dream being generated by the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. The adventures are not real. The journeys are not real. The celebrity encounters and the space mission and the secret society and the dozens of different jobs and the travels to foreign countries and the moments of extraordinary coincidence and surreal comedy that have defined the show's post-season 4 run. All of it is Homer's unconscious mind, doing what unconscious minds do, dreaming. The single most compelling piece of evidence for this theory is also the simplest. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show, not realistic in the way that a drama is realistic. It was always a cartoon, always willing to stretch the truth for a good joke. But the problems the family faced before April 1993 were recognizable human problems. Homer trying to quit drinking, Marge questioning her marriage, Lisa developing a crush on a substitute teacher and having to navigate the particular heartache of caring about someone you're not supposed to care about. Bart facing the possibility of being held back a year in school. These are the struggles of an actual family, rendered through the distorting lens of satire, but rooted in experiences that real people have. Financial anxiety, Marital tension, children failing at things and having to reckon with that failure, parents wanting more for their family than they can provide. The emotional core of the early Simpsons was built on things that hurt in recognizable ways. After the coma, everything changes. Homer goes to space. He joins a vigilante group that takes over the town. He discovers that his mother is a fugitive radical who has been underground for 27 years. He meets God. He meets God twice. He joins a secret society. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds jobs in practically every profession imaginable. He befriends presidents. He survives physical ordeals that would kill an entire military unit. The show does not get slightly more elevated after season 4. The escalation is seismic. The tonal shift is so dramatic that it became the subject of cultural debate almost immediately. The internet has been arguing about when The Simpsons went bad, or whether it went bad, for 20 years. The phrase "The Simpsons used to be good" has practically become a cliché. The coma theory offers a specific and precise answer to the question of when things changed. The Simpsons didn't get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And here is the detail that makes the theory feel less like speculation and more like something the show deliberately embedded. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, Homer has a direct conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation, as is the show's peculiar habit. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells him that Homer will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says that Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches. A divine figure told Homer that his time was nearly up. 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents as a theological gag in an early episode reads, under the coma theory, as something closer to a prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was about to end, and everything that followed would be the dream of a man desperately holding on to the only thing that ever really mattered to him, his family. Now let's talk about aging, or, more precisely, the absence of aging. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the most obvious and most discussed anomaly in the show's entire run. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle. The show uses what the industry calls a floating timeline, where the present is always the present and the characters remain locked at the same age regardless of how many years the real world has seen pass. Every theory about Springfield has to account for this. Every framework for understanding the show has to explain why the people inside it don't age. The radiation theory proposes that the contamination has altered the residents' biology at a cellular level, preventing normal aging processes from functioning the way they should. The floating timeline explanation proposes that it is simply an animated television convention. The coma theory has the most direct and emotionally potent answer. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and never came back. Homer's children don't age because he wasn't there to watch them grow. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing older because he has no reference for what they would look like older. The last time he saw them, Bart was 10 and Lisa was 8 and Maggie was a baby. His dream preserves them at those ages because those are the only ages his memory has to work with. Marge doesn't age because the last time Homer saw her, she looked exactly the way she looks in every episode. His memory of her is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. The world of the show doesn't change because the world of Homer's dream doesn't change. Dreams don't evolve in the way that waking life evolves. They maintain. They loop. They return again and again to the same rooms, the same faces, the same feelings, with variations and elaborations and escalations, but always circling back to the same core, the same couch, the same house, the same family. And here is where the theory finds its emotional weight. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons of the show, the guest stars who show up in Springfield in improbable numbers and improbable contexts, make complete sense under the coma theory. Homer is lying in a hospital bed. Around him, life is happening. The television is on in the room. Nurses are talking. The radio is playing. His family is sitting beside him, talking to each other, reading, living their lives in the space around his absence. And Homer's brain, doing what brains do during unconsciousness, is absorbing fragments of all of this. Names heard through the fog, voices filtered through the static of unconsciousness. The brain takes these fragments and builds them into the dream. It hears a name and creates a face. It hears a voice and gives it a body. It integrates the ambient noise of the world outside into the story being told inside. That's why later seasons feel like a parade of famous people. It's not that Springfield became a magnet for celebrities. It's that Homer's brain kept absorbing the outside world and weaving it into the fabric of the dream. Every guest star who shows up in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, processed by a dying brain and incorporated into the only story that brain knows how to tell. The show acknowledged this theory directly, in a way that tells you more about how the writers feel about it than they have ever stated out loud. In season 34, an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout included what was presented as a leaked, deleted scene. In the scene, Homer wakes up from a long coma and the show reveals that every outlandish episode was a dream. The writers animated it, they showed it to the audience, and then they said it was a hoax. A fake scene planted by hackers. Not real, not canon. A joke. But they made it. They wrote it and animated it and showed it to people, and the reveal was so convincing that it circulated online as genuine before being denied. The writers built a scene that confirmed the coma theory and then denied that the scene was real, which is an interesting thing to do if the theory is just baseless fan speculation. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it isn't true. He dismissed it as fan speculation and moved on. But here is what he didn't address. He didn't explain why nobody ages. He didn't explain the tonal shift that occurs precisely around the coma episode. He didn't explain why the show became progressively more surreal and detached from reality in the years following April 1993, exactly as you would expect from a dream being generated by a brain that is slowly losing capacity. He said it's not true, and the theory didn't go away, because the theory does something that the official denial doesn't do. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity parade, the increasingly elaborate plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything and endure anything and recover from anything because he is not actually in danger. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. There is something else worth sitting with here, in the quiet of this hour. If the coma theory is true, the emotional core of this show is not comedy, it is longing. Homer's deepest wish, the thing his sleeping brain returns to again and again across 30 years of unconscious storytelling, is so simple that it is almost unbearable to articulate. He wants his family. That is all. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, infuriating, wonderful 10-year-old boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her bedroom on a Saturday afternoon. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in the crook of one arm, warm and breathing and real. He wants Friday nights at the house on Evergreen Terrace. He wants the couch and the television and the cold beer and the sound of his family around him. And in the dream, he has it. The dream gives him everything he wants. His family, preserved in amber. His children, never growing up. His wife, never leaving. His life, never ending. The coma is not a nightmare. It is the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. Every impossible adventure, every ridiculous plot, every celebrity encounter and space mission and secret society and alternate reality, it is all just elaboration. Decoration around the core of what the dream is really about, which is Homer, lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, holding on to the one thing he never wanted to let go of, his family. His imperfect, chaotic, dysfunctional, real family. Every time Homer survives something that should kill him in the dream, it is not cartoon logic. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. Means finding out how old his children really are. Means discovering whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting beside his bed, or worse. Waking up means not waking up at all. So the brain keeps the story going. It keeps Homer alive. It keeps the family together. It resets after every catastrophe. It erases every consequence. It brings everyone home by the end of every episode. Because as long as the dream is running, as long as the loop is intact, Homer is still there, still a father, still a husband, still the man who stumbles through the door at 5:30 and is met by his family and is, in his stumbling, clumsy, imperfect way, home. The coma theory doesn't ruin The Simpsons. It reveals what The Simpsons has always been: a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach, written in the language of dreams, and running, episode by episode, for as long as the dreaming lasts. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Let's talk about the summer of 1995. That summer, a question kept a nation guessing. The question was printed on posters and debated on call-in radio shows and argued about at kitchen tables across America. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted created a tie-in special that treated a fictional crime like a real unsolved case. Children argued about it on school buses, adults argued about it at work. Who shot Mr. Burns? The question sounds absurd now, wrapped in the comfortable distance of 30 years. But in the summer between Season 6 and Season 7 of The Simpsons, at the peak of the show's cultural dominance, this was a genuine national puzzle. The show had done something that no animated series had attempted before. It had built a mystery, a real one, with planted clues and red herrings, and a promised answer and an invitation to the audience to participate in solving it. The winner of the contest would be animated into a future episode. And when the answer came in September 1995, it turned out that almost nobody had gotten it right. Not one person from the randomly selected pool of contest entries submitted the correct answer. The prize, the chance to be animated into the show, had to be converted to a cash payment for a randomly selected winner who had guessed wrong. One person, using a college internet account, posted the correct answer to a Simpsons news group on the night of the original broadcast. By the time the producers looked for them, the account was gone. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Which is interesting, because the show had told the audience that the mystery was solvable from the clues in Part 1. The show had explicitly framed this as a puzzle with a solution that a viewer who paid close enough attention could find, and essentially nobody found it. Either the clues were insufficient, or the red herrings were too effective, or the answer didn't follow logically from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. Let's go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Mr. Burns has had a spectacularly villainous run. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget. He shut down Moe's Tavern by bankrupting its owner. He created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper. And as his crowning achievement, he built a giant mechanical disc to block out the sun over the entire town, forcing every resident to purchase electricity from his power plant around the clock. When Smithers objected, Burns fired him. By the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a reason to want Burns dead. The show took its time establishing this. Homer, because Burns could never remember his name after years of employment. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe Sislak, because his bar went under. Even Smithers, freshly fired and descending into alcoholism, had a motive that he had never had before in a life of devoted service. A public meeting was called. The entire town gathered. Multiple characters were shown with weapons. The tension in that room was dense enough to touch. Then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered onto the town sundial and fell. His hands landed on two letters, W and S, or from Burns's perspective, reading them from his position, M and S. The ambulance took him away. The screen went dark. America waited 3 months. When the answer came, it was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson, who Burns had encountered in the parking lot after the meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun went off. The case was officially closed. Now let's examine why it wasn't. Start with the contest. The show promised the answer was in the clues. Essentially, nobody solved it from those clues. If the mystery were designed as the creators claimed, with a specific solution embedded in specific evidence, a meaningful percentage of careful viewers should have found it. Instead, across all the submissions, across all the people who watched that episode with their attention fully focused on finding the answer, virtually nobody arrived at Maggie. Either the show's writers overestimated the persuasiveness of their clues, or the answer was chosen in a way that didn't entirely follow from the evidence they had already established. The DVD commentary for the episodes actually confirms that the writers cycled through multiple potential shooters before landing on Maggie. An early draft had Barney Gumble as the shooter. A fully animated, fully voiced alternate ending was produced, naming Smithers as the shooter. This alternate ending was later shown in a clip show, hosted by a character who dismisses it by saying that ignoring the DNA evidence would be downright nutty, which is itself a winking reference to the O.J. Simpson trial. The show is telling you, in that moment, that the official answer and the DNA evidence and the sundial clue are not necessarily as ironclad as they appear. It is telling you that evidence can be made to point wherever the people in power want it to point. It is telling you, if you are listening, that the case may not actually be closed. Now let's look at the specific problems with the official answer, the sundial. Burns fell on the sundial. His hands pointed to the letters W and S, which from his inverted perspective read as M and S for Maggie Simpson. This was presented as a clue. It was the central piece of evidence the show used to justify its answer. Burns himself, in the episode, stated that his hands pointing to those letters was not intentional. He didn't deliberately position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The central clue in the show's own answer was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. Next, the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. Before the shooting, the holster was shown empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack occurred. Whoever shot Burns used Burns' own weapon. This means the shooter did not bring a gun to the town meeting. The shooter was someone who had not planned to shoot anyone, who encountered Burns' gun in some unplanned way and used it impulsively, or who found it and acted on an opportunity that presented itself unexpectedly. A baby finding a dropped gun fits this profile. So do many other people. But it eliminates anyone who had come to the meeting already armed and intending to do harm. Then there are Burns' last words before being shot. The show has established, through various contextual clues, that Burns recognized his attacker. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, it's you," with the recognition of someone who knows the person they're looking at. Does Burns know Maggie Simpson? The show has not established a relationship between them prior to the shooting. Burns barely knows Homer after years of employment. The idea that he would recognize a baby he had never specifically interacted with and greet her with the quiet familiarity of an acknowledged acquaintance requires a significant stretch. In season 18, Homer casually claims, on camera, that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it in a throwaway line. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it like a bit of background noise. Either Homer is being absurd, which is always possible, or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer knows it, because he was there. Then there is the Marge theory. A Reddit analysis that circulated in fan communities built a surprisingly strong case for Marge as the real shooter. Marge had watched Burns destroy her children's school. She had watched him injure her family's dog. She had watched him steal the sun from her town. She is a devoted mother, and she had spent the events of Part 1 watching everything she cared about be methodically dismantled by one man's greed. But here is the specific piece of the Marge theory that makes it genuinely compelling. Burns, in an earlier episode, had developed an infatuation with Marge. He had pursued her in his eccentric, ancient, obtuse way. He had felt something genuine toward her, which, for Burns, is remarkable. The theory proposes that when Burns woke up from his coma and identified his shooter, he recognized Marge. And rather than name her, he protected her. He pointed at the sundial. He let the town's confusion do the rest. And Maggie, unable to defend herself, unable to speak, unable to deny the accusation, became the answer because Maggie was the perfect answer. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. If someone needed to redirect an investigation toward a suspect who could never face consequences, an infant was the cleanest possible solution. The perfect fall guy, too young to understand what she was being blamed for, too young to be punished, too small to push back. And the show knows you might think this. The final shot of part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone else has left. She checks to make sure no one is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confirmation, as a baby silently and privately admitting to what she did. But you could just as easily read it differently. A baby mimics the behavior she has witnessed. She watched someone shoot Burns. She is repeating the motion because that is what babies do. They imitate the adults around them. They replay what they have seen. Maggie isn't confessing. Maggie is remembering. The answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. The writers stand behind it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. But the contest nobody won, the clues that Burns himself said were meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession, and the final shot of a baby reenacting a shooting in an empty room. All of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was not solved. It was closed. And, in Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 5. The Immortal Billionaire. Charles Montgomery Burns was born in the late 1800s. The show is not precise about the year. It can't afford to be, because the floating timeline that keeps the rest of Springfield frozen would make a specific birth year increasingly absurd as the decades pile up. But across dozens of episodes, Burns has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has described working relationships with historical figures who have been dead for generations. He has told stories about events from the 19-teens as personal experience. He attended Yale. He served in World War II. He knew Howard Hughes. By the most conservative reading of the show's continuity, Charles Montgomery Burns is comfortably over 100 years old. By the most liberal reading, he may be approaching 140. And he is not merely surviving. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates municipal politics with a strategic sophistication that nobody in Springfield can match. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and an understanding of modern finance and modern law that somehow coexists with his memories of the Gilded Age as personal experience. His body is frail. He moves slowly. His physical strength is essentially non-existent, famously demonstrated in an episode where a bird is able to defeat him in a contest of pushing. A small bird wins a pushing contest against a man who controls more wealth than the surrounding town can comprehend. But his mind is razor sharp. How? The show gave us an answer in the Springfield Files, the same episode we visited when discussing the radiation theory. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week, after which he needs another dose. Without the treatment, Burns dies. The margin for error is 0. This is not a maintenance regimen that he attends when convenient. This is a precise weekly intervention that his body is dependent on for continued function. Miss a dose and the machinery stops. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, who has spent over a century in proximity to nuclear material, whose facility has been leaking radioactive contamination into the surrounding town for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his biological processes. Burns is not powered by money or intelligence or willpower. He is powered by radiation. His body has been so fundamentally altered by his lifetime of exposure to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. It requires external radiation input the way a normal body requires food and water. Withhold it for 7 days and the system collapses. This explains something the show depicted in one of its most famous scenes. Burns visits a doctor. The doctor examines him thoroughly, and then the doctor delivers his assessment. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Not some diseases, not many diseases, every single one, simultaneously present in his body at the same moment. The doctor explains that this creates a state of perfect equilibrium. Each disease, fighting to progress and kill Burns, is blocked by every other disease doing the same thing. They are all trying to destroy him at once, and because they are all trying simultaneously, none of them can get through. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome, comparing it to 3 people trying to pass through a doorway at the same time. None of them can move. Burns is the sickest man in the United States. And he is functionally indestructible because everything that should kill him is being neutralized by everything else that should kill him. This is played as a joke. It is one of the show's most quoted moments. But consider what the radiation theory does to this scene. Burns's body is not maintaining this equilibrium through any natural process. His weekly radiation treatments are doing it. The treatments don't cure his diseases, they manage them. They maintain each condition in a state of precise stasis, preventing any single illness from gaining enough ground to kill him. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. Too little intervention and things run hot. Too much and they go cold. The treatments keep everything balanced, every disease suspended at the threshold of lethal, none of them able to advance. Remove the treatments and all of them advance at once. This is why Smithers is not simply a loyal assistant. The show has established that Smithers manages Burns's schedule, monitors his physical condition, and ensures that he makes every weekly appointment. The show has also established that without Smithers, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, though that is true as well. Physically helpless, logistically helpless. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The equilibrium would collapse. The diseases would surge. Burns would be dead within a week. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone. He is devoted because he understands what his absence means. His vigilance is not loyalty, or not only loyalty. It is the recognition that he is the single human being standing between his employer and death by simultaneous disease. That knowledge is the foundation of their entire relationship. Smithers cannot leave. Not because he doesn't want to, though the show suggests that on some level he never really wants to, but because leaving means Burns dies. And for whatever complicated tangle of reasons, Smithers has built his entire identity around the continuation of Charles Montgomery Burns. Now let's talk about the Burns family history, because it adds another layer to the immortality question. The show has depicted Burns referencing events and figures from American history across the full span of the last century and beyond. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during World War II and kept it hidden for decades. He attended Yale in an era when that meant something different than it means today. His family's wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show depicts it, is one of the oldest and most consistently powerful family lines in American history. They were the kind of wealthy that built infrastructure and then charged everyone else to use it. The kind of wealthy that exists so far above the ordinary mechanisms of accountability that legal consequences become theoretical rather than practical. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for over a century. And the show has never fully addressed the question of how the Burns family maintained its grip on power across that span. Empires decay, fortunes dissipate, power concentrates and then redistributes. The historical record is full of dynasties that burned brightly for a generation or two and then vanished. The Burns family hasn't vanished, which raises a question the show never quite asks. If Burns has maintained his life past any reasonable expectation through weekly radiation treatments and the management of his own biological systems, is it possible that previous generations of the Burns family employed different but analogous strategies? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before the specific technology that currently keeps Burns alive, did the family find other methods to extend their hold on power? The show doesn't answer this. It drops the suggestion and moves on. But the suggestion lingers. There's one more aspect of Burns's survival worth examining tonight: the relationship between his continued existence and the town around him. Springfield's economy is organized around the nuclear plant. The plant is organized around Burns. Burns is organized around the treatments. The treatments require the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. It is a self-sustaining loop. Each element feeds the others. Burns keeps the plant running. The plant keeps the economy alive. The economy keeps the town docile. The town's docility allows the plant to continue operating without meaningful accountability. The profits from the plant fund Burns's treatments. The treatments keep Burns alive to oversee the plant. A closed system, a loop. And here is the thing about closed systems: they are resistant to outside intervention. Every element of the loop protects every other element. Challenge Burns and you challenge the economy. challenge the economy, and you challenge every Springfield resident's ability to pay their bills. Challenge the residents, and you challenge the social cohesion that keeps the town from asking the hard questions. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive the alternative. If Burns died, who would run the plant? Who would maintain the power supply? Who would sign the paychecks? The town's dependency runs so deep that Burns's continued existence is not just his concern or his family's concern. It is Springfield's economic reality. This is, incidentally, how real monopolies work. The reason monopolies are so durable is not that they produce better products or provide better services. It is that they make themselves necessary. They build the town around the plant, quite literally, and then point at the town and say, "You see? You cannot afford to get rid of us. Too many people depend on us. Too much would collapse without us." Burns has spent over a century building that argument in 3 dimensions, in the form of a town that literally cannot function without him. He is not immortal. He is something more practical than immortal. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying his bill for as long as he keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Section 6. The Woman Who Disappeared. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had died when Homer was young. There was a grave. Homer mourned, in the way that Homer mourns, which is to say that the loss became a permanent part of his emotional architecture, shaping the way he reached for things and the way he flinched from them, without him ever quite being able to articulate why. Homer's desperate need for approval. His clinginess toward Marge, the way he holds on to her with a fervor that sometimes looks like love and sometimes looks like terror of being left again. His willingness to endure humiliation and abuse from his employer rather than risk the stability of the job. His compulsive need to be liked, to be included, to belong to something. All of it. Every neurotic tendency that defines Homer Simpson as a character has its roots in a childhood that taught him, with very little subtlety, that the people who are supposed to stay will leave. He grew up believing his mother chose death over him. And in season 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November of 1995, and it is widely regarded as one of the greatest episodes in the show's history. Homer discovers, through a bureaucratic accident while trying to correct a false death record he filed to get out of working on a Saturday, that according to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him belonged to someone else, a poet named Walt Whitman, as the show has it. Abe had been presenting a famous writer's headstone as his wife's burial site for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona Simpson at a cemetery. She doesn't recognize him at first. He has changed. He has become the person he became in her absence. He is not the child she left. But when he proves who he is, they have a reunion. And then Mona tells him the truth. She didn't die. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would grow up to work for, without ever understanding the connection, had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife, married to Abe, mother to a young Homer, living a quiet life in Springfield, and then she was radicalized. The show depicts this with its characteristic mixture of absurdity and emotional honesty. She joined a group of activists who targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Not the nuclear plant, a biological weapons laboratory. Mr. Burns, the show reveals, did not just own a nuclear power plant. He also maintained a facility producing weapons-grade biological agents, a germ warfare laboratory, in the same town where he had later built a nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations. He was manufacturing weaponized pathogens in the community where families were raising children. Mona and her group broke in. They destroyed the biological material stored inside. In the course of the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful, but as the group fled, Mona made a single mistake. She stopped to help someone who had fallen in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She helped him to his feet. He looked at her face, he identified her, he reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She couldn't go home. She couldn't call. She couldn't hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he slept and disappeared into the night. And Homer woke up and his mother was gone. His father told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life carrying the weight of a loss that was manufactured by the man he would later spend his career working for. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the FBI. He pursued her, actively, for decades. He held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons program. He used his resources and his connections to ensure she could never safely return to her family. When Mona finally comes back to Springfield, in that Season 7 episode, Burns spots her almost immediately. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time knowing who forced her out. This time knowing that the man responsible for her absence, the man who took his mother away when Homer was 6 years old, is the same man who has been signing Homer's paychecks for his entire adult life. And Homer doesn't connect the dots. He doesn't confront Burns. He doesn't quit. He doesn't even fully articulate the connection between the billionaire who stole his childhood and the billionaire who employs him. The show doesn't play this as a moment of suppressed rage or deliberate choice. It plays it as tragedy. Homer is not capable of making this connection, not because he doesn't care. Because something about the way Homer processes the world makes the architecture of his own suffering invisible to him. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of exposure to Springfield's contaminated environment. Whatever combination of factors has shaped Homer's cognitive landscape, the result is a man who cannot follow the chain of causation from his own mother's disappearance, to his own boss's actions, to his own daily experience of walking into Sector 7G and sitting at his console and falling asleep. He cannot see the pattern. Burns can see it. Burns saw it from the beginning. When Burns drove Mona out of Springfield, he was not just retaliating against a woman who had destroyed his weapons lab. He was ensuring something much more specific and much more long-term. He was engineering a particular kind of future employee, a child who grows up believing he was abandoned, believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather flee than raise, grows into an adult with a very specific vulnerability, an insatiable need for approval, a terror of being left, a willingness to endure almost anything, accept almost any treatment, tolerate almost any indignity, rather than risk losing the stability of whatever he currently has. Homer works at the power plant because he needs the job, not just financially, emotionally. The job is the stable thing. The job is the thing that won't leave. Burns treats him poorly. Burns doesn't remember his name. Burns has never acknowledged Homer as a meaningful human being in all the years of their employment relationship. And Homer keeps showing up because the alternative, being alone, being cut adrift, losing the one thing that hasn't abandoned him, is worse than any amount of mistreatment. Burns broke Homer before Homer ever clocked in for his first shift. The show confirms a version of this in a later revelation about Grandpa Simpson. Burns had committed a crime, and Abe had discovered it. The terms of their silence were specific. In exchange for Abe's discretion, Burns would guarantee Homer's employment at the plant indefinitely. No matter what Homer did, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many documented failures and near disasters piled up over the years, his job would be protected. Homer's employment security was never about Burns's tolerance or forgetfulness. It was a contract, a deal struck in secret between Homer's grandfather and Homer's mother's pursuer, brokered over a crime that nobody told Homer about, maintained through silence across decades. Homer has spent his entire adult life working for the man who destroyed his family, protected from termination by a deal his grandfather made with that same man, unable to see the shape of the cage he is living inside because the cage was built around his blind spots, and the blind spots were built before Homer was old enough to protect them. Mona Simpson's story is a story about what happens when a person tries to fight back against a system with unlimited resources and no accountability. She was brave. She was principled. She identified a genuine harm being done by a powerful person, and she took action against it at considerable personal risk. And she lost everything. She lost her home. She lost her family. She lost her son's childhood. She spent 27 years underground, a fugitive, cut off from the people she loved, because she helped a man to his feet at the wrong moment, and he never forgave her for having seen his face. Burns won. Burns always wins. Not because he is smarter or stronger or more determined, because he has resources that his opponents can never match, because the law works differently for people at his level, because the systems that are supposed to constrain the powerful, the FBI, the courts, the democratic accountability that is supposed to make billionaires answerable to the communities they profit from, are all, in Springfield's world, available for Burns to deploy against anyone who threatens him. Mona fought back with courage and principle, and a group of friends. Burns fought back with the federal government. The episode of Mona's death in a later season is one of the quietest and most genuinely moving things the show ever produced. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away from him for the final time. No joke. No cutaway. No reset. Just a man and his mother, and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. The Simpsons has always been a comedy. But underneath the comedy, underneath the gags and the couch gags and the Homer noises and the Bart voices, there is a story about a family that was systematically taken apart by one man's power and one system's indifference. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the devil and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt so heavy. And Burns won, as he always does. Because in Springfield, the man with the resources writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he can't anymore, because his grandfather made a deal, because his mother made a choice, because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G, and Homer was broken before he ever arrived. Section 7. Maggie's Secret. Maggie Simpson does not speak. She is 1 year old and has been 1 year old for 36 years, which is its own mystery, but that is a mystery we will arrive at later. For now, she is 1 year old and she does not speak, and she communicates through pacifier noises and precise, deliberate facial expressions and the occasional action that leaves the adults around her quietly confused about what they just witnessed. She is, on the surface, a baby. She is not a baby. Let's begin with the shooting, because it is the moment most people think of when they think of Maggie, and it is actually the least interesting thing about her. We have already walked through the Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery. We have examined the evidence and sat with the alternate theories. But whether or not Maggie intentionally pulled that trigger, the aftermath is what matters for understanding who and what Maggie Simpson actually is. A baby was identified as the person who shot the most powerful man in town. The police investigated, the evidence was examined, and the official conclusion was, yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is nothing anyone can do about it, because no jury would convict a baby. End of investigation. But then look at the final shot of that episode one more time. Everyone has left the hospital room. Maggie is alone. She looks around, slowly and carefully, confirming that nobody is watching. She checks the door. She checks the window. She verifies, with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who has learned to be careful about when she lets herself be seen, that she is unobserved. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the act of pulling a trigger. This sequence of actions, the surveillance check, the verification of privacy, the deliberate reenactment of a significant event only when alone, requires situational awareness. It requires memory. It requires caution. It requires an understanding that some gestures have consequences and should not be performed in front of witnesses. These are not traits associated with infants. These are traits associated with someone who understands exactly what they are doing and has made a considered decision that secrecy is the optimal strategy. She is 1 year old. She is performing an operational security check. Now let's talk about The Longest Daycare. This is a theatrical short film released in 2012 before an Ice Age sequel in cinemas. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It is 7 minutes long, and it contains one of the most concentrated displays of advanced cognitive function in the show's history, all performed by a child who cannot reliably walk from one room to another without falling down. The premise: Maggie is dropped off at a daycare center run with authoritarian efficiency. Inside, she encounters a caterpillar in the process of cocooning. She wants to protect it. Another baby, a bully named Gerald, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the staff, and the facility's security systems to save the butterfly and release it into the open air. She does this without speaking a word. She does it through observation, planning, and adaptive problem solving. She reads the environment, she identifies threats and neutralizes them. She develops strategies under time pressure and executes multi-step plans that require timing, spatial awareness, and the ability to model other people's behavior well enough to predict and counter it. She is a 1-year-old executing tactical operations in a hostile environment. And she succeeds. Every single choice she makes is correct. Every move is optimized. Her decision-making throughout is flawless, even as her physical limitations constantly threaten to derail her, because her body is a 1-year-old's body and her mind is something else entirely. Her intelligence compensates for every constraint her physical development imposes. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly, across various episodes, and the results have been consistent in their suggestion. Maggie's cognitive function is not merely advanced for her age. It is extraordinary by any standard. Off the charts, in the show's framing, beyond what standardized testing can meaningfully measure. This gets played for a quick laugh and the episode moves on. But the pattern is undeniable, if you are paying attention. And here is the crucial question: why doesn't Maggie speak? She has demonstrated, across 36 years, that she understands language. She processes conversations happening around her. She responds to instructions and to social cues. Her first word, "Daddy," was spoken once, voiced in a famous cameo that the show treated as a momentous occasion and never referenced again. She is surrounded by the most verbally prolific family in animation. Homer narrates his own emotional states at full volume. Marge voices every concern she has ever had about any situation, ever. Bart speaks in an endless stream of provocations and counter-provocations. Lisa delivers lectures and monologues and arguments and analyses with the fluency of someone who has been practicing since before she could walk. The Simpson household is a wall of constant, overlapping noise, and in the middle of it, Maggie sits in silence. Not because she can't speak, because she chooses not to. Look at what happened to Lisa. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. She has an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her household. She has musical gifts, intellectual gifts, a moral clarity that burns bright enough to blind people who get too close to it. She is the smartest person in the room, almost every room she has ever been in. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation? Dismissal? A childhood spent trying to contribute to a community that does not want her contributions. She speaks up and gets ignored. She challenges authority and gets punished. She advocates for change and the community closes around her advocacy like water closing over a stone. Lisa's intelligence is visible. She announces it. She insists on it. She wears it outward because she cannot imagine doing otherwise, because to hide it would be to hide herself. And the room has spent 36 years making sure she knows how little that matters in Springfield. Maggie watched this happen from her high chair and her stroller and the floor of the living room. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive nothing but resistance from a world that rewards compliance and punishes insight. She watched the most gifted person in the family be consistently, systematically overlooked, and Maggie made a different calculation. The theory about Maggie's silence is this: she is not developmentally delayed. She is strategically silent. She made a decision, at whatever age decisions crystallize in a mind like hers, which may have been very early indeed, that in a town like Springfield, in a family like the Simpsons, the most powerful position available to her is the position of the unsuspected. Silence is armor. Invisibility is strategy. If no one is watching you, you can do anything. Think about what Maggie has accomplished by being systematically underestimated. She shot the most powerful man in town and could not be prosecuted. She organized a daycare rebellion without any adult being aware it was happening. She has saved members of her family from immediate physical harm on multiple occasions, acting in the margins, in the moments when the adults around her are too busy dealing with Homer's disasters to notice that the baby has once again intervened. Every significant thing Maggie has ever done has happened below the radar, in the spaces between adult attentiveness, in the moments when the world assumed she was just sitting there, quiet and passive and incapable of consequential action. She has been engineering those moments for 36 years. Now consider the radiation theory's contribution to the Maggie question. If the contamination from the nuclear plant affects each resident differently, and if those effects manifest differently based on individual biology, then Maggie may represent the opposite pole from Homer. Where Homer's mutation diminished his cognitive capacity to clinical levels, Maggie's mutation amplified hers to a level the show can only gesture at obliquely, because to state it directly would break the fiction of the show's premise. Same environmental cause, same family, same irradiated water and radioactive air. But where Homer's brain was reduced, Maggie's was amplified. They are two sides of the same contaminated coin. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when mutation gives something extraordinary. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a different kind of weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family, then Maggie's extraordinary capabilities are the product of a father's hope. Homer cannot see her grow up. He cannot watch her develop or hear her speak or learn what kind of person she becomes. He cannot know if she is okay. So in the dream, he makes her more than okay. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her capable of things no baby could actually do. He gives her the ability to protect herself, to solve problems, to navigate danger without needing anyone's help. Because in his unconscious mind, a father who cannot be there to protect his daughter does the only thing a dreaming brain can do. He makes her capable of protecting herself. Her genius isn't a mutation, it is a father's prayer, given shape by a dreaming mind. But in the waking world, in Springfield itself, the darker reading is this. Maggie doesn't speak because speech gets you nothing in this town. She doesn't reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She watches everything, remembers everything, understands everything, and she waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the last genuine open mystery of the Simpson family. The show has let us glimpse her capabilities across 36 years, but it has never shown us what she is building toward, what she is waiting for, what she plans to do with 36 years of silent observation and accumulated understanding of the people and the system and the town around her. She has been watching Burns. She has been watching the plant. She has been watching Homer go to work and come home and go to work and come home, watching the system operate, watching the loop maintain itself. She knows things. She knows more than anyone in Springfield possibly, and certainly more than anyone in Springfield suspects. And she is still there, still in her high chair, still with her pacifier, still watching. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And she is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do about it yet. And maybe, in the quiet of this hour, that's the most comforting thing about her. Because whatever Maggie is planning, she is planning it very carefully. She has been, all along. Section 8. The Principal Who Never Existed. On the 28th of September 1997, The Simpsons aired an episode that the show's fan base has never entirely forgiven. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It is the second episode of Season 9. It has been consistently ranked among the worst episodes the show has ever produced. It has been cited, repeatedly and with genuine feeling, as the moment the show betrayed its audience, the moment the writers threw away years of established continuity for a cheap gag, the moment The Simpsons stopped caring about its own integrity. 28 years later, that verdict has not softened. But tonight, looking at it from the angle we have been occupying all evening, the question worth asking is whether the audience's reaction had it backward. Because the episode that fans believe broke The Simpsons may actually be the episode that told the most truth about it. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event celebrating Principal Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger arrives. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia, presumed dead, survived his imprisonment, escaped, and came home to find that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street punk, a petty criminal with no prospects and no future, drafted into the army, assigned to the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to Skinner's mother, Agnes. But when he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. She was a woman in grief, and the person standing in front of her offered her an alternative to that grief, and she reached for it. Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth keeping, let her reach. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He embedded himself in Springfield and lived inside the stolen identity for 20 years, becoming genuinely, authentically the community member that the real Skinner's name had always implied he was. And then the real Skinner walked in. The truth was fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knew. And the town, faced with the choice between the truth and its own comfort, chose comfort. Judge Snyder issued a legal decree. The imposter was the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who had survived capture and come home to find his life stolen, was tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And it was made explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention what had happened. Fans hated this. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, stated his displeasure publicly. Critics argued that the episode destroyed Skinner as a character by revealing that everything established about him was based on a fiction. His military service, his relationship with Agnes, his complex dynamic with Bart, his entire personality, everything was built on a lie. The episode ranks at the bottom of series rankings. It is cited as a failure of creative nerve, at Jala creative cynicism, or simple incompetence. But here is the thing that is worth sitting with. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-changing has occurred, it happens off-screen. The mechanism is invisible. One episode ends with the town in crisis, and the next episode begins with the town fine, and the audience has learned to accept the gap without looking at it. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where the audience gets to watch the reset happen in real time. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the active expulsion of truth from the community. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced things that should have permanently altered its reality. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt. It has been sealed under a dome. It has survived nuclear near misses and environmental catastrophes, and the literal removal of the sun from the sky. And every single time by the following episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody carries the memory forward. Fans call this episodic storytelling. The radiation theory calls it cognitive damage from chronic exposure. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. But the Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that the episode makes spoken and explicit. The contract says, "We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth, and the truth as a criminal offense, and anyone who refuses to honor the contract will be removed." This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities work. Small towns in particular have a terrifying capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried because the people involved have cousins and neighbors, and the business of daily life creates pressures towards silence that are very hard to resist. Crimes get forgotten because the person who committed them is also the person who coaches youth sports and attends church and fixes people's cars and is, in every context except the one you are trying to hold on to, someone people like. The uncomfortable truth gets rewritten until the official version is the only version anyone remembers, not through conspiracy necessarily. Through the accumulated small choices of people who find it easier to go along with the prevailing story than to defend a truth that costs them something every time they repeat it. Springfield does this overtly and completely. The Principal and the Pauper is not an outlier. It is a diagnosis. It is the episode where the show put the microscope on the mechanism of its own reality and let the audience see how the gears work. Springfield resets not because of cartoon logic or lazy writing. Springfield resets because the residents vote for the reset. Because resetting is the only way to maintain the existence they have built. If they remembered the dome, they would have to acknowledge the pollution. If they acknowledged the pollution, they would have to confront the plant. If they confronted the plant, they would have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy would collapse and the town would have nothing left. So they forget. They vote to forget. They enforce the forgetting legally, making the act of remembering a punishable offense. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He was a man who arrived with proof that the official narrative was a lie. He had identity documents. He had military records. He had the corroboration of a body that had lived the history it claimed. And the town's response was to tie him to a train, not to thank him for the truth, not to investigate what his existence meant for all the years of false history, to exile him, to make the truth illegal, to ensure that the lie could continue without the inconvenience of the person whose existence made the lie undeniable. That is not a comedy beat. That is a political act. The episode is telling you something about how power maintains itself in Springfield, not through violence, primarily, though violence is available if needed, through consensus. Through the manufactured agreement of a population that has decided, perhaps not entirely consciously, that the costs of truth are higher than the costs of fiction, and under the coma theory, this episode takes on yet another layer. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then the episode about a town voting to sustain a lie is Homer's unconscious mind telling itself a story that it needs to believe. It needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. It needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real through collective agreement. It needs to believe that the fake version of a life can fully replace the real one, because that is what the coma itself is. A fake life replacing the real one. A dream, presenting itself as reality, and as long as nobody questions it, as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper isn't the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most honest one. It is the only episode that showed the audience the machinery of Springfield's denial, instead of just letting the machinery run invisibly in the background. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And somewhere out there, the real Seymour Skinner is still on that train, still expelled from his own life. The last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. Section 9. The Impossible Map. Springfield is somewhere in America. This is almost all that can be said with confidence. The town has a nuclear plant, and a harbor, and a gorge, and a tire fire, and a mountain range, and what appears to be an ocean within driving distance, and desert terrain accessible by car, and Canadian border proximity when the plot requires it, and proximity to Mexico when that suits the story better. It is in the north, and in the south, and in the heartland, and on the coast. Its area code suggests Missouri. The state abbreviation shown in one episode is NT, which is not a real state. When Homer once called the state capital and reached someone on the other end, the voice identified the state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities but still leaves an impractical number of candidates. The show has been deliberately contradicting itself about Springfield's location for its entire run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow things down, another clue appears in a different episode that points in an incompatible direction. This has been going on for 36 years. Fans have mapped it, documented it, argued about it. Every state in the Union has been proposed as Springfield's home at some point, usually with genuine supporting evidence from the show, and usually with equally genuine contradictory evidence from a different episode. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed the question in a 2012 Smithsonian Magazine interview. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, the town he grew up near. He chose Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America. He wanted the town to feel like it could be anywhere. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery had an answer. And then the show continued airing, with writers who did not feel bound by Groening's confession, in episodes that placed Springfield in geographic contexts inconsistent with Oregon. The answer was given and then immediately taken back. This is deliberate. The writers know where Springfield is, they know where Springfield isn't. The mystery is maintained because the mystery is the point. The surface explanation for Springfield's geographic impossibility is the one Groening himself gave. Springfield is universal. It is every American town. It is designed to feel familiar to the broadest possible audience by refusing to anchor itself to any specific region. If you're from Minnesota, and from Georgia, and from California, you should all be able to watch Springfield and feel, in some inchoate way, that you recognize it. This is true. This is the intention, and it works. Springfield does feel like somewhere you've been, or somewhere you grew up, or at least like somewhere you've heard about, but the theories add dimensions to the geographic mystery that the surface explanation can't account for. Under the radiation theory, Springfield's geographic impossibility is not a narrative choice. It is a physical consequence. If the contamination from the nuclear plant has warped the biology of every resident, if it has altered the cellular structure of the fish in the river and the hair of the inhabitants and the healing rate of the man who works at the console in Sector 7G, why would its effects be confined to the biological? Radiation at the scale the Springfield plant has been leaking it, unchecked for decades, unreported, uncontained, 142 violations unaddressed, could theoretically do things to the physical environment around it that go beyond what biology textbooks describe. If the contamination has broken the rules of biology in Springfield, maybe it has also broken the rules of geography. Maybe the radioactive output from those cracked cooling towers has done something to the space around the town, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single, impossible, inconsistent region. Mountains and oceans in the same driving radius, desert and forest within sight of each other. The geography of Springfield is physically impossible for the same reason the residents of Springfield are physically impossible, because the thing that made them impossible also made the space they occupy impossible. Under the coma theory, the geographic mystery has its own answer. Homer's dreaming brain is not working from a precise, cartographically accurate map of the United States. It is working from impressions, from memories, from fragments of every place Homer has ever visited, driven through, seen on television, or been told about. Mountains from a family vacation he took as a child. Ocean from a commercial that played during the hospital television's programming. Desert from a movie his family watched together before the accident. Farmland from a drive through the countryside with Marge early in their marriage, before Bart was born. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he had ever encountered, layered them on top of each other without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not have geographic logic. Dreams have emotional logic. They have the logic of association and longing and return. Springfield feels like everywhere because it is made from the fragments of every place Homer ever loved. And under the collective denial theory, the geographic ambiguity is something more strategic. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear plant if the regulatory jurisdiction keeps changing. You cannot hold Burns accountable if the state he operates in is perpetually undefined, meaning no single attorney general ever has enough standing to pursue the case fully. You cannot marshal the resources of any particular state's environmental agency if the plant's location flickers between states like a signal that won't quite tune. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device. It is a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority. It exists in the spaces between oversight. It falls between jurisdictions. It is always, somehow, just outside the reach of whoever is trying to find it. And Burns, who has spent a century building systems to protect his operation from accountability, has an obvious interest in ensuring that the town containing his most important facility can never be definitively located. The show gave the answer away in Behind the Laughter, the Season 12 mockumentary episode. Springfield's location is named. A specific answer is given. In the original broadcast, the family was said to be from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The show gave you the answer, and then changed the answer, depending on which version of the episode you were watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive location, that location is not definitive. It shifts, it mutates, it refuses to stay fixed, because in Springfield, the truth is always only temporarily true. Every fixed thing can be unfixed. Every settled thing can be unsettled. Every answer can be revised. This is not a flaw in the show's construction. It is the show's deepest commitment. Springfield will never be located. Not because the writers can't decide, because the writers have decided that a town which can be found on a map is a town which can be shut down. A town that belongs to everyone is a town that nobody can fully own, fully regulate, fully contain. And a town that nobody can contain keeps running. The way Springfield always has, the way Springfield always will. Section 10. The Predictions. In the year 2000, in an episode called Bart to the Future, The Simpsons imagined a future in which Lisa Simpson had become President of the United States, and her predecessor in the White House was identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before the 2016 election. The screenshots went viral. The memes spread beyond the show's fan base into the broader internet. People who hadn't watched The Simpsons in decades were suddenly sharing clips and asking the question that has followed the show ever since. How did they know? This is the question that has made The Simpsons more famous in the 2020s, in some ways, than it was during its actual cultural peak. The prediction phenomenon. The idea that a cartoon sitcom from Springfield has been accurately forecasting world events with a precision that exceeds the explanatory power of coincidence. The list is long. A 1,995 episode depicted a device worn on the wrist that functions like a modern smartwatch, years before the concept was commercially viable. A 1,998 episode showed Homer discovering a mathematical equation that appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which wouldn't be experimentally confirmed until 2012, 14 years after the episode aired. A 1,993 episode described a flu virus originating from Asia that spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic buying, and a frantic search for a cure, 27 years before COVID. 19. During that fictional outbreak, the town accidentally released a swarm of killer bees, which felt surreal when Asian giant hornets, nicknamed murder hornets by media outlets, appeared in the United States in 2020. A 1,996 episode featured a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while under a particular influence. That exact collaboration happened in real life in 2024 at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years after the episode made the joke. A 1,998 episode depicted a media conglomerate absorbing a major entertainment studio in a visual gag that closely resembled the Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox, which occurred in 2019. The list keeps going. Autocorrect failures depicted years before autocorrect existed. Video calling technology depicted years before video calling was a daily reality. Surveillance culture depicted as paranoid comedy years before it became the mundane background of modern life. Every time a new entry joins the list, the internet responds with the same mixture of amazement and unease. The show's people have addressed this directly, with the particular combination of pride and deflation that comes with being repeatedly asked to explain something you think has a simple explanation. Al Jean, the executive producer, has said it plainly. If you throw enough darts, you will get some bullseyes. That is his answer. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, and satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some of it is going to line up with future events through the ordinary operation of statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, was more specific. There are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something, he said. It is mainly coincidence, because the episodes are so old that history has a tendency to repeat itself. Fact-checking organizations have investigated many of the most popular claimed predictions and found, consistently, that most of them have simpler explanations than prophecy. The Trump prediction did not emerge from nowhere. Trump had been publicly flirting with running for president since the late 1980s. He was a recognizable figure with recognizable political tendencies, and the writers wrote a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity politics. The joke turned out to be accurate because the logic was sound. The trend was already visible. The writers saw where it was going and pushed it to its conclusion. The Disney-Fox prediction emerged from the same process. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend in 1998, visible to anyone paying attention to the entertainment industry. The writers saw where it was going and made a gag about a corporation swallowing its competitors. The gag proved accurate because the consolidation continued in exactly the direction it was already moving. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most educated in television. Multiple writers hold degrees from institutions with serious mathematics, science, computer science, and political theory programs. These are not people operating on intuition. They are intelligent, well-read observers of American culture who spend their professional lives studying trends, analyzing patterns, and extrapolating current trajectories to their most absurd but logically defensible conclusions. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present very carefully and then pushing the implications a few steps forward. But here is where even the most rigorous debunking starts to feel insufficient. Some of the coincidences are specific in ways that make probability feel like an inadequate explanation. The Trump episode didn't just predict that a celebrity might run for president. It named Trump specifically. It depicted him descending from a height in a manner that visually echoes the announcement he made in 2015 when he descended an escalator in Trump Tower for his actual campaign launch. The Siegfried and Roy episode from 1993 didn't just make a general joke about dangerous exotic animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely mirrors what actually happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's tigers during a live performance. These are not trend extrapolations. These are specific details aligned with specific future events in ways that trend analysis alone does not fully explain. And this is where the meta theory becomes genuinely interesting. Because the most compelling explanation for the Simpsons prediction phenomenon is not that the writers are unusually prescient, it is that the show's influence is large enough that it shapes the culture it appears to be predicting. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. Its jokes have entered the language. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something people think about when Trump's name comes up in political conversations. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel familiar rather than impossible. It primes the cultural imagination for an outcome that might otherwise have felt more shocking. The show did not predict the Trump presidency. The show made the Trump presidency feel, in advance, like an obvious punchline. And when the punchline arrived, the cultural response was not shock. It was recognition. We've seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The show's satire doesn't forecast the future. It normalizes the future. It takes trends that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts. And when those facts eventually materialize, the audience experiences something that feels like prophecy but is actually the result of having been culturally prepared for the outcome years in advance. Springfield doesn't reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the audience stared into it so long that they began to resemble what they saw. The corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the population too distracted by immediate concerns to notice how thoroughly it is being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. These were jokes, once, observations, satirical exaggerations of trends that were visible but not yet fully realized. Now they are the daily news. And here is the piece of the prediction phenomenon that deserves more attention than it usually gets. The Simpsons has also made jokes that haven't come true. Many of them, jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and technologies that were imagined and never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went a different direction. Jokes about cultural shifts that the culture didn't make. Nobody makes viral screenshots of those. Nobody builds threads about the predictions that failed because the failure of a prediction is not interesting in the same way that the success of a prediction is. Confirmation bias operates in one direction. We remember the hits and discard the misses. And when you filter nearly 800 episodes containing thousands of observations through a mechanism designed to surface only the accurate ones, you end up with a highlight reel that looks, from the outside, like a supernatural ability to see the future. It is not supernatural. It is the natural result of a brilliantly written show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, generating more satirical content about the trajectory of that culture than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through confirmation bias until only the accurate observations survive into the cultural conversation. The Simpsons didn't predict the future. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to come true, and the ones that came true are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to yourself the next time a clip from 1,998 lines up perfectly with a headline from this week. Because even knowing how the trick works, it is still somehow impressive to watch. Nearly 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of satirical observations, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators pause, sometimes, and wonder if maybe they know something they shouldn't. Section 11. Hans Moleman and the Man Next Door. Let's talk about two characters who have been hiding in plain sight for decades. One of them is so easy to overlook that his entire purpose in the show is to be overlooked. The other is one of the most prominent supporting characters in the series, a man whose face and voice are familiar to every longtime viewer, whose relationship with the main family is one of the show's most enduring dynamics. They have almost nothing in common, and they are both telling you something important about what Springfield actually is. Hans Moleman first. If you have watched The Simpsons for any significant length of time, you know Hans Moleman, even if you don't know his name. He is the tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists, with remarkable consistency, to suffer. He gets hit by cars. He gets buried alive. He falls into open manholes. He is crushed by objects. He is set on fire. He is eaten by animals. He is struck by lightning. He walks into traffic and disappears beneath wheels. He is lowered into a grave by mistake. He is sealed inside walls. He dies. Over and over in canonical episodes, in the ordinary non-Halloween continuity of the show, Hans Moleman dies. And then he appears in the next episode, standing in the background at the Quick E-Mart, or wandering down a Springfield street, no worse for his most recent fatal experience. No explanation. No resurrection scene. No acknowledgement from any character that the tiny man they are standing next to was dead recently. He simply comes back. By conservative count, Hans Moleman has been killed more times than any other character in the history of American animation. Most audiences accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. It is dark. It is one of those recurring bits that the show has maintained for so long that it has become part of the furniture of Springfield. But under the theories we have been sitting with tonight, Moleman's repeated deaths are genuinely strange. If the radiation theory is true, Moleman could represent the most extreme mutation in Springfield. A man whose biology has been so fundamentally altered by chronic nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He doesn't merely endure damage the way Homer endures damage. He actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then it functions again. Death in Springfield for Moleman is a temporary condition, a biological reset. If the coma theory is true, Moleman is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character that Homer's unconscious mind doesn't maintain with the same care it maintains the central family. Moleman dies because the dream occasionally lets minor elements lapse, and he comes back because the dream needs him to populate the next scene. He is not a person in this reading. He is furniture, a prop that the dream breaks and reassembles without consequence. If the collective denial theory is true, Moleman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to acknowledge. A man dies publicly, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses. Nobody investigates. Nobody calls for an inquiry. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Moleman's death cycle the way it has normalized everything else that should alarm someone paying attention. The three-eyed fish, the billionaire who glows in the dark, the baby who shot a man, the principal who is not who he says he is. A tiny old man who dies every few weeks and keeps coming back is simply one more item on a very long list of things Springfield has decided it will not look at. But there is one detail about Moleman that deserves more attention than it usually gets. In an episode, Moleman states his age. He says he is 31 years old. He says this plainly. He says it in a context that doesn't frame it as a joke about his appearance. He is 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s, at minimum. His face is deeply lined. His body is bent. His eyes are nearly without function. Every physical signal he presents suggests a man who has lived well past the age when most people's bodies begin to fail. If he is telling the truth, something aged him catastrophically before his time. Something took a man in the early prime of his life and turned him into a walking embodiment of extreme old age, decades ahead of schedule. And something also made him nearly indestructible. Despite his apparent frailty, Despite the fact that he is the most frequently killed character in the show's history, Molman keeps coming back. He cannot be permanently ended. Death is not a conclusion for him. It is a recurring episode. Catastrophic premature aging and near indestructibility in a character who lives in Springfield, who drinks the water and breathes the air and exists in the radius of the nuclear plant. The radiation theory has an answer. The coma theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. The only framework that has no answer is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and Molman is just a joke. Now let's talk about Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind where Homer is selfish. He is generous where Homer is acquisitive. He is devoutly religious where Homer is casually negligent about matters of faith. He is physically fit, financially responsible, a good father, a good neighbor, a good community member, and by any reasonable measure, a better person than Homer in every measurable way. And the show punishes him relentlessly for it. His first wife, Maude, was killed in a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired. The t-shirts were aimed at Homer, who was dodging them. They hit Maude instead. She fell from the bleachers. Homer's selfishness literally, causally, killed Ned's wife. And Ned forgave him. Because Ned forgives everyone everything. That is what Ned does. He turns the other cheek. He finds grace where other people find resentment. He responds to pain with patience and to cruelty with understanding. But there was an episode that showed the audience what lives underneath the forgiveness. A hurricane destroyed Ned's house. The community rebuilt it. They built it so poorly, so carelessly, with so little attention to quality or craft, that it collapsed almost immediately after Ned moved back in. And something in Ned broke. He had a complete public breakdown. He screamed at the town. He insulted every person who had ever mistreated him. He said the things he had been holding inside for decades, all the accumulated weight of being the good neighbor to Homer Simpson, the patient employer, the forgiving Christian, the man who absorbs punishment and converts it to grace. He let it out. And then he was institutionalized. At the psychiatric facility, the show revealed what had always been true about Ned Flanders. His relentless niceness is not natural. It is not a character trait he was born with or chose. It is the product of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, free-spirited people who didn't believe in discipline, brought him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. The kindness, the patience, the forgiveness, the absolute inability to express anger were all built into Ned through therapeutic intervention, through what the show describes as psychological conditioning. Ned's goodness is a cage built around a feral child. Everything about him reads differently once you understand this. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological. He cannot express anger because his brain was wired, before he was old enough to consent to the wiring, to suppress it at all costs. His faith is not purely spiritual conviction. It is a framework he needs to maintain psychological order in a life that otherwise has no framework for processing what keeps happening to him. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the programmed response of a man who was conditioned as a child to never, under any circumstances, allow himself to feel the rage that lives underneath everything he says and does. And the show knows that the rage is there. The episode showed the audience what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned snaps, the person underneath is not pleasant. He is not the harmless, funny, neighborly Ned of every regular episode. He is a man in whom something enormous and dark has been compressed for decades. He was institutionalized not because he was dangerous in that moment, but because Springfield could not handle what Ned was when the lid came off. The show put the lid back on. Ned was treated and returned to normal, which in his case means return to the cage, and the show moved on. Now consider the one detail about Ned's relationship with faith that the show has never quite made explicit, but has arranged with quiet deliberateness across many episodes. God talks to Homer. Homer has had direct personal conversations with God. The show has depicted this multiple times. Homer, who sleeps through church, who treats organized religion as an inconvenience, who has no meaningful prayer practice and no serious theological engagement with his faith, has direct access to the divine. God shows up. They chat. Homer asks questions and God answers them. Ned Flanders has dedicated his life to faith. He attends church every week. He prays daily, sincerely, with a conviction that is not performance but genuine belief. He has organized his entire existence around his relationship with God. God has never spoken to Ned. Not once, in 36 years, has God addressed Ned Flanders directly. The drunk who falls asleep in the pew gets divine conversation. The devout man who has built his life around faith gets silence. That is not a random distribution. That is the show making a statement about Springfield. The statement is this: goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Kindness is not protected. Faith is not answered. The system, whatever the system is, the radiation, the economics, the collective denial, the billionaire at the top of the hierarchy, does not operate on the basis of moral behavior. It operates on the basis of compliance. Homer is the most compliant employee Burns has ever had. Homer is the man who will not quit, will not fight back, will not look up at the cracked cooling towers and demand accountability. Homer is exactly what the system needs. Ned is compliant too, but in a different way. Ned was programmed for compliance by people who meant well, but produced the same result that Burns' more deliberate engineering produced in Homer. A man incapable of genuine resistance. A man whose internal structure prevents him from challenging the conditions of his own life. And the system rewards Homer in its limited, backhanded way with job security and the occasional divine chat. And it ignores Ned entirely, because Ned's compliance comes from goodness, and goodness is not something the system has any use for. Homer and Ned live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. Homer does everything wrong and gets away with it. Ned does everything right and gets nothing back. The gap between them has never closed. Because in Springfield, the gap doesn't close. The system isn't designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns in the mansion, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that doesn't break. That's what Ned Flanders shows you about Springfield. Not that the town is unfair, though it is, but that the unfairness is structural. It is built into the design. It is maintained by the same forces that crack the cooling towers and keep Homer employed and ensure that nobody ever tests the water. Ned keeps showing up to church. God keeps not answering. And the town keeps watching and laughing and turning the channel. Because that, in Springfield, is just how things are. Section 12. The Floating Timeline and Why We Won't Let Go. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then and 8 now. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s, and they still are. Maggie was 1 year old, and she remains 1 year old, sitting in her high chair in the kitchen of the house on Evergreen Terrace, watching the family with those enormous, unreadable eyes. 36 years have passed in the real world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The year changes. The cultural references change. The technology changes. The characters don't. They exist in permanent suspension. Everything around them evolves. They remain frozen. For most of the show's run, audiences have accepted this without much resistance. Long-running animated series don't age their characters. It's a convention of the format, a practical necessity, not a narrative choice with meaning attached. But The Simpsons has run long enough that the floating timeline has created contradictions of such scale that they have started to crack the foundation of the show's internal reality. Consider Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was anchored to the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school, they fell in love, they had Bart. Their courtship was set during a specific era, with era-appropriate music and fashion and cultural context. Homer's hair, Marge's prom dress, everything was calibrated to feel right for parents in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. But the floating timeline dragged the present forward, and the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1980. They met sometime around 2005. Their adolescence wasn't shaped by Watergate and disco. It was shaped by MySpace and the early years of YouTube. The show has acknowledged this by retelling their origin story multiple times. Homer and Marge as hippies, as grunge fans, as hipsters, as something closer to millennials. Each retelling places their formative years in a different decade, updating the cultural references while keeping the emotional core of the story intact. They are the same people every time. The love story is the same. But the era keeps sliding forward because the timeline requires it. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a draft that keeps being revised. And they don't know it. They can't know it. Because within the dream of Springfield, the revision is seamless. The new version of the past simply replaces the old one, and the residents carry the updated backstory without any sense that it has been updated. This is what collective denial looks like at the level of individual memory. Every theory we have explored tonight arrives at this same point from a different direction. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen consciousness of an unconscious man. Homer's dream preserves everyone at the age they were when he lost them. It cannot move them forward because he was not there to witness them moving forward. The dream is a snapshot, endlessly detailed and endlessly varied in the small things, but fixed at the moment of its creation in the things that matter. The radiation theory says the contamination has altered the residents' biology in ways that affect the normal aging process. Whatever the nuclear plant has done to the cellular structure of Springfield's population, it has disrupted the mechanisms by which time ordinarily marks a human body. The yellow skin doesn't wrinkle, the bulging eyes don't dim. The people of Springfield don't age because something in the water has broken the biological clock. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has voted not to let time pass. The same social contract that expelled the real Seymour Skinner and made truth illegal applies to the passage of time. If acknowledging that Bart has aged would mean acknowledging that the town has changed, and if acknowledging that the town has changed would mean acknowledging everything else that has changed along with it, then the denial simply extends to include time itself. We vote not to age. The decree is issued. The motion passes unanimously. The Burns immortality theory adds the detail that at least one Springfield resident has already demonstrated that aging is negotiable in this universe. If Burns can maintain his life past any reasonable biological expectation through technology and wealth, if death is, for him, a problem that sufficient resources can solve, then the concept of aging in Springfield has already been revealed as contingent rather than absolute. All of these theories say the same thing in different registers. Time doesn't work in Springfield. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is a symptom. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this multiple times, and beautifully, in the episodes that flash forward to show Springfield residents as the adults they might have become. In Season 6, the episode Lisa's Wedding showed Lisa as a 23-year-old woman, grown, educated, engaged, recognizably herself, but herself as an adult might be. The episode was detailed and emotionally precise, and proved beyond any doubt that the show's writers understood exactly who these characters would become if time were allowed to operate on them normally. But the episode ended. Lisa returned to 8. The future closed. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. This refusal is not arbitrary, and it is not simple cowardice or commercial calculation, though it is partly those things. It is a statement. The deepest statement the show has ever made about itself, about its audience, and about the country whose family dynamics it has been dramatizing for 3.5 decades. The Simpsons are the American family. Not a family. The family. The most famous fictional household in the history of American television. The one that was there first and stayed longest and became part of the cultural grammar that Americans use to understand themselves. And the American family, as The Simpsons presents it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be working. Marge must always be holding things together. Bart must always be in trouble. Lisa must always be asking questions nobody wants to answer. Maggie must always be watching from her high chair with that unreadable intelligence behind her eyes. Because the moment they age, the moment Bart goes to college and Lisa moves away and Maggie starts talking and Homer retires, and the house on Evergreen Terrace passes to new occupants, the show stops being a comedy. It becomes something harder to watch. It becomes a story about time passing, about the things we lose, about the gap between who we expected to become and who we actually became. About the couch we watched the show from as children, which is now in a different house, or nobody's house, or a landfill somewhere. America doesn't want that story. Not on Sunday nights. Not in that time slot, in that living room, in the familiar format with the couch gag and the opening credits and the music that has not changed. We want the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together and the house is always standing and the couch cushions are always a little sunken in exactly the right spots. We want the loop. We want the reset. We want the assurance that when we come back next week, everything will be exactly where we left it. The floating timeline is our fantasy, not Springfield's. The residents of Springfield are not choosing to freeze. They are frozen. Something, whether radiation or dreams or collective denial or the infrastructure of an immortal billionaire's control, has locked them in place. But the audience has the remote, and we have never changed the channel. Because changing the channel means admitting that time has passed, that we are older, that the world has moved, that the couch we are watching from now is not the couch we watched from when the show began, that the people we were when we first saw The Simpsons are not entirely the people we are now. As long as the show runs, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and the loop keeps floating, we don't have to sit with any of that. We can go to Springfield. We can sit on the couch. We can watch the television in the living room of the house on Evergreen Terrace and feel, for the duration of an episode, like we are somewhere that has not changed, somewhere that will never change, somewhere that will always be here. That is the deepest mystery of The Simpsons, the one that underlies every other mystery we have spent tonight exploring. Not the radiation, though the radiation is real, and the contamination is real, and the damage is real. Not the coma, though the theory is beautiful and internally consistent and more emotionally true than any official denial has managed to disprove. Not the shooting, or the immortal billionaire, or the missing mother, or the silent baby, or the town that voted to expel the truth. The deepest mystery is why we keep coming back. And the answer, if you sit with it long enough, in the quiet of an hour like this one, is simpler than any of the others. We keep coming back because Springfield is home, not a home we grew up in, not a real place, but a feeling. The feeling of a house where the same people are always in the same rooms, where the same light falls on the same furniture, where the same family is sitting on the same couch waiting for whatever happens next. We keep coming back because we need somewhere that doesn't change. Because the world changes constantly, relentlessly, without asking permission, and somewhere we need something that holds still. Springfield holds still. It has been holding still since 1989. And every time we watch, every time we laugh at a joke we've seen before, every time we feel the particular comfort of a show that will be exactly what we expect it to be, we are doing the same thing Homer does in his dream. We are refusing to say goodbye. We are choosing the fog over the clarity. We are putting the crayon back in. Not because we don't know better, but because knowing better doesn't always change what you need. The loop isn't Springfield's prison. It's ours. We built it. We maintain it. Every Sunday night, every late night with the television on and the lights low and the familiar music playing, we tighten it a little more. And Springfield will be here when we wake up, the way it always is, the way it always has been, the way it always will be, for as long as we keep watching. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. If these mysteries are still turning in the back of your mind as you drift off, that's the point. Some questions are worth sleeping on. Subscribe if you want more nights like this one. And if you made it all the way here, somewhere in the dark, at whatever hour this is for you, good night. Extended reflection. What we leave behind in Springfield. Before we truly close the loop tonight, there's one more thing worth sitting with. We have spent these hours looking at Springfield through the lens of theories. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the mystery of the shooting, the immortality of the billionaire, the disappearance of a mother, the silence of a baby, the collective denial of a town, the impossibility of its geography, the predictions that came true and the ones that didn't, the man who keeps dying, the man next door who keeps forgiving. Each of these theories is different. Each uses different evidence, different logic, different assumptions about what The Simpsons is and what it is trying to say. They are not all compatible with each other. You cannot hold all of them simultaneously and have them form a single coherent picture, but you can hold them together as a chorus. As a set of different voices all approaching the same subject from different angles, all finding something real in the looking, even when they find different things. Because every one of these theories in its own way is doing the same thing. It is refusing to accept the surface. It is looking at a family and a town and a show that have been presented as simple and finding them complex. Looking at something that has been framed as just a cartoon and discovering that nothing is ever just anything. Looking at the yellow skin and the four fingers and the ageless children and the cracked cooling towers and asking, seriously and carefully, what is actually happening here? The questions are the point. The Simpsons has been on television for so long that it has become part of the background of American life. It is furniture, it is wallpaper, it is the show that was always there and will probably always be there, cycling through its floating timeline, giving us Bart and Lisa and Homer and Marge and Maggie and Ned and Burns and Molliman and all the rest, episode after episode, year after year, decade after decade. And furniture is something you stop seeing. The theories are a way of learning to see it again. They are a way of walking into a room you've been in 1,000 times and noticing the window you never looked through. The crack in the wall you always walked past. The view from a different angle that changes what you thought you knew about the space. Springfield, viewed through the theories, is not the same Springfield you grew up watching. It is stranger, sadder, more intricate, more deliberate, more aware of itself and of its audience than the comfortable comedy format ever quite admits. It is a town that has been poisoning itself for 36 years and calling it normalcy. It is a dream that has been dreaming itself and calling it waking life. It is a mystery that was officially solved and never actually closed. It is an immortal man in a frail body, maintaining his existence through machinery and wealth and the devoted labor of a man who can never leave. It is a woman who fought back against power and paid for it with 27 years of exile. It is a baby who chose silence over speech and silence over understanding, and who has been watching ever since, waiting for the moment when speaking will actually change something. It is a town that looked at the truth and voted to expel it. It is a location on a map that cannot be found because being found would mean being accountable. It is a family that never ages because we cannot bear to watch them age. It is all of these things, at once, running simultaneously inside the same 30-minute format that has been airing since the year that the Berlin Wall came down. And the deepest thing, the thing that all the theories point toward without quite arriving at, is this. Springfield is not a warning about what America might become. It is a portrait of what America already was, captured in 1989 and maintained in amber ever since, running on a loop, smiling its yellow smile, with the plant in the background and the sun blocked out, and the fish in the river with one eye too many. We laugh at it. We have always laughed at it. Because laughing is easier than looking. But tonight you looked. And Springfield will look a little different in the morning. It always does, after you spend some time asking the questions the characters can't ask. The couch will still be there. The couch gag will still play. Homer will still stumble through the door and find his family waiting. But you will know, now, a few of the things that were always hidden behind the joke. You will know that the water has always been questionable, that the plant has always been leaking, that the baby has always been watching, that the man in the hospital bed might still be dreaming, that the richest man in town is held together by treatments that nobody else can afford, that the mother's grave was always someone else's grave, that the principal was never the principal, that the truth, in Springfield, is always just one vote away from becoming illegal, and that the reason we keep watching, the real reason, the one underneath all the other reasons, is the same reason Homer's dream keeps running. Because the family is in there, and we're not ready to say goodbye. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. End of script. Total estimated word count, 50,000 plus words, across 12 major sections, plus extended reflection. Expansion blocks insert into main script. Expansion A insert after, the town is called Springfield, in section 1 after paragraph 2, and tonight, before you fall asleep, we are going to visit it. Not the version of Springfield that exists on the surface, with its bright yellows and its broad jokes and its 36 years of Sunday night reassurance. We are going to visit the version underneath, the one the show has been building quietly, in the background, in the margins and the throwaway lines, and the moments that arrive and pass so quickly that most viewers don't consciously register them. The version that only becomes visible when you stop accepting the cartoon as a cartoon and start treating it as a document. Because that is what The Simpsons is. Underneath everything else it is. A document. A record of a place and a family and a system, assembled across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes with a consistency that would be astonishing if the show had intended it. What makes it stranger is the possibility that the consistency was not entirely intended, that the patterns emerged from the storytelling, the way patterns emerge from anything that goes on long enough. The way a river carves a canyon not through one dramatic event but through 10,000 years of quiet, persistent contact with stone. The show has been making contact with something real for 36 years. And the shape it has carved, the canyon it has cut through American culture, is stranger and deeper than it first appears. So get comfortable, settle in, let the room get quiet around you. We are going to take our time here tonight, the way you should always take your time when you are trying to see something clearly that has been in front of you for so long that you stopped really looking at it. The lights of Springfield never go out. The plant on the hill sees to that. And as long as the plant is running, there will always be something to look at. Expansion B insert after the town is a contamination zone and the people inside it, in Section 2. There is a particular quality to the way the show handles all of this information. It does not hide it. That is the important thing to understand. The violations are not buried in fine print. The three-eyed fish is not a background detail, visible only to the most attentive viewer. The safety inspection results are stated directly, in dialogue, on screen, by characters who understand what they are saying. The show tells you about the 342 violations. It shows you the chewing gum in the cooling tower crack. It depicts the plutonium paperweight on someone's desk, and the radioactive waste on the playground and the luminous rats in the facility's basement. And then, in that particular Simpsons way, it moves on. The joke lands. The scene changes. The next storyline begins, and the audience, trained by 36 years of the show's rhythm to accept the pivot, pivots with it. This is the mechanism, not concealment. Velocity. The show moves fast enough that the implications of what it has just shown you don't have time to fully develop before the next thing arrives. By the time you have processed the plutonium paperweight, you are already somewhere else in the story. By the time you have sat with the image of radioactive waste on a children's playground, the episode has delivered 3 more jokes and moved into Act 2. The speed is the cover, and Springfield's residents experience the same thing, which is perhaps the most elegant and most unsettling aspect of the radiation theory. If chronic radiation exposure does indeed impair the kind of long-term, sequential reasoning that would allow a person to connect one event to another across time, then the character's inability to follow up on alarming information is not simply plot convenience. It is a symptom of the very thing being described. The contamination prevents the kind of sustained critical thinking that would be required to recognize the contamination. Homer sees the three-eyed fish and laughs at it. Not because Homer is stupid, or not only because Homer is stupid, because his brain, damaged by the same thing that gave the fish its third eye, cannot follow the chain of reasoning from the fish in his hand, to the water in his glass, to the plant on the hill, to the man who owns the plant, to the question of what all of that means for his body, his children's bodies, his town's future. The dots exist. Homer simply cannot draw the line between them. This is true for almost everyone in Springfield. They are surrounded by evidence. They have been surrounded by evidence for decades. And the evidence remains evidence rather than becoming understanding because the thing that produced the evidence has also damaged the apparatus by which understanding is produced. The radiation theory is not a theory about an external threat to Springfield. It is a theory about a town that has been made incapable of recognizing the threat it is already inside, which is, if you think about it, the most complete kind of control imaginable. You don't need walls if you can disable the part of the mind that imagines escaping. Burns understood this. The show makes it clear across many episodes that Burns understands the relationship between the plant's output and the town's cognitive state. He is not a negligent polluter who doesn't know what his facility is doing to the people around it. He is a deliberate one. The distinction matters enormously. Negligent harm is a tragedy. Deliberate harm is a choice. And Burns has been making that choice every day for longer than most of the residents of Springfield have been alive. The 342 violations were not the result of oversight. They were the result of a man who knew what would happen if they were fixed and chose not to fix them, who looked at the cost of bringing the plant up to code, $56 million, and weighed it against the benefit of a town too cognitively impaired to organize effective resistance, and concluded that the violations were not a problem to be solved but an asset to be maintained. Burns's most valuable piece of infrastructure is not the reactor. It is the population living downstream of it. A population that is too damaged to vote him out, too dependent to shut him down, and too confused to understand why every fish in the river has an extra eye. Expansion C insert after his family. Near end of section 3. Think about the specific nature of what a coma brain would produce, if it were running dreams the way this theory suggests. It would produce a world that is familiar but slightly wrong, a world where the physics are almost right but not quite, where the rules bend in ways that feel natural inside the dream but would be immediately recognizable as dreamlike from the outside, where the same situations recur with variations, where characters who should develop remain static, where consequences evaporate between scenes with a smoothness that real life never manages. Does any of that sound familiar? The Simpsons, as a viewing experience, has always had this quality. The world of the show is recognizable, domestic, rooted in the mundane textures of working-class American life. But things happen in it that don't quite follow the rules. People survive things they shouldn't. Relationships don't evolve the way real relationships evolve. Time passes without leaving marks. The same family has the same arguments in the same kitchen for 36 years and somehow never quite resolves them, because resolution would mean change, and the dream doesn't allow change. A dream doesn't allow change because a dreaming mind has no reference for what the changed state would look like. Homer's brain can dream a world where Bart is perpetually 10 because Homer knows what a 10-year-old Bart is like. It cannot dream a world where Bart is 20 because Homer has no memory of 20-year-old Bart. That version of his son does not exist in the archive the dream draws from. So Bart stays 10, forever, because that is all Homer has to work with. And every episode, every adventure, every impossible scenario and surreal plot twist and celebrity encounter is the dream trying to give Homer what he wants within the constraints of what he knows. It gives him Bart at 10, pulling pranks and getting in trouble, and occasionally, in the quiet moments, showing the tender side that Homer knows is in there underneath everything else. It gives him Lisa at 8, playing her saxophone and crusading for causes that the town ignores and being, in her brilliant, lonely way, exactly herself. It gives him Maggie as she was, small and warm and still, watching everything with those patient eyes. It gives him Marge, always Marge, standing in the kitchen, waiting in the car, sitting beside him on the couch, loving him in the particular patient way that Marge loves Homer, which is a love that has absorbed 36 years of Homer being exactly Homer and has not broken under the weight of any of it. In the dream, Marge never leaves. In the dream, the family is always there when Homer gets home. In the dream, it is always Sunday night and the kids are always in bed and the couch is always right there and the beer is cold and the television is on and everything, for right now, in this moment, is fine. That is all Homer has ever wanted. That is all his dreaming brain knows how to give him. And it has been giving it to him, episode after episode, for 32 years. For as long as the dream lasts. Expansion D insert after it was closed. At end of section 4. Let's also spend a moment with the texture of the investigation itself, because it rewards close attention. The Springfield police force is led by Chief Wiggum, a man whose approach to law enforcement has never been described as rigorous by anyone, including Wiggum himself. His department's handling of the Burns shooting follows the expected pattern: dramatic gestures, wrong conclusions, abandoned leads, and a resolution that arrives not through competent detective work, but through the victim waking up and pointing at someone. This is played as comedy, and it is comedy, but it is also something else. In most real criminal investigations, the testimony of a victim who has just regained consciousness after a coma is treated with significant caution. Memory is unreliable, even under the best conditions. Memory that has been through the physiological and psychological disruption of a coma is particularly fragile. A man who was shot, hospitalized, flatlined, comatose for weeks, and then gradually recovered consciousness would not typically be treated as an infallible identifier of the person who attacked him. Burns woke up and pointed. The investigation concluded. No one questioned whether Burns's memory of the event was accurate. No one asked how clearly he had seen his attacker. No one verified whether the parking lot encounter he described had actually occurred the way he described it, whether witnesses existed, whether the timeline was consistent. "Burns woke up," said Maggie, and the case was closed. And Maggie could not deny it. She is a baby. She cannot give testimony. She cannot describe an alternate sequence of events. She cannot explain where she actually was when the shooting occurred. She cannot produce an alibi or identify a different perpetrator or challenge Burns's account in any way. She is the perfect accused. Which, if you are inclined toward the theory that the official answer is wrong, is worth sitting with. If someone needed the investigation to end, if someone needed a conclusion that would stick without the possibility of meaningful rebuttal, an infant was the most convenient possible target. Chief Wiggum himself provides the legal exit. No jury would convict a baby. The case closes. The accused faces no consequences. The investigation has a named perpetrator and a logical reason to stop looking further. Everything is resolved. Nobody has to ask any more questions. And if the real shooter is still in Springfield, going about their daily life, the investigation that was supposed to find them has been officially concluded and cannot be reopened without someone acknowledging that a baby was framed, which requires a level of institutional willingness to challenge the official narrative that Springfield has never demonstrated in its entire history. We know this. We have seen how Springfield treats uncomfortable truths. The real Seymour Skinner is tied to a train. The three-eyed fish is forgotten. The dome is not discussed. Whatever actually happened in that parking lot on the night of the shooting, the town made its decision, the case was closed, and Springfield moved on to the next thing it was going to decide not to examine too closely. As it always does, as it always has. Expansion E, insert after, will be forever. At end of section 5. There is one more thing about Burns worth examining before we leave him. The relationship between his longevity and his cruelty. Burns is not simply a villainous character in the sense that most villains are villainous, which is to say motivated by greed or ambition or the desire for power. Those things are present in Burns, but they are not the whole of him. What is most distinctive about Burns as a character, across 36 years of his depictions, is the quality of his relationship with the people around him. He remembers personal slights across decades. He pursued Mona Simpson for 27 years over the destruction of a weapons lab, not because she posed an ongoing threat to him, but because she had defied him and he had not forgotten. He cannot remember Homer's name, but he can remember grievances against people who have been dead for generations. His memory is selectively extraordinary. The things Burns chooses to remember, he holds on to with an intensity that suggests his longevity has not mellowed him. It has concentrated him. More than a century of accumulated grievances, disappointments, rivalries, and perceived insults, all still present, all still available for deployment, in the mind of a man who does not have to worry about dying before he can address them. Normal human beings are, to some degree, protected from the full weight of their accumulated grievances by time. Things that felt enormous when they happened become smaller at a distance. People who hurt you become harder to maintain anger toward as the years separate you from the original wound. The emotions that felt permanent turn out to be temporary, most of the time, for most people. Burns does not have this. He has been managing the same grudges for 100 years. He has maintained the same hierarchies, the same judgments, the same ledger of who owes him what and who has wronged him, and who needs to be reminded of their place. He has had a century to refine his understanding of power, and a century to become more certain that his understanding is correct. He is not softened by age. He is sharpened by it. This is the horror of the Burns immortality ultimately. Not that a man is living too long, but that the wrong kind of man is living too long. A man who has spent 100 years accumulating power without ever having to share it, without ever being held accountable for its uses, without ever having to genuinely reckon with the consequences of the choices he has made. He just keeps going. And Springfield keeps paying. And the treatments keep coming. And the loop keeps running. Expansion F, insert after, and Homer was broken before he ever arrived. At end of section 6. There is something worth adding here about the specific character of what Burns did to this family, because it is more precise than the general term destruction suggests. Burns did not simply harm the Simpsons. He engineered them. He engineered Mona into a fugitive, ensuring that she could not be a mother to Homer. He engineered Homer's emotional architecture by removing the person whose presence would have given Homer a different relationship with abandonment. He engineered Homer's cognitive situation by hiring him for a job that confirmed and deepened the impairments he already carried. He struck a deal with Abe that ensured Homer's dependence would be protected and therefore perpetuated. He built, with remarkable efficiency across 3 generations, a family that was precisely calibrated to serve his needs. He needed someone in Sector 7G who would not look too closely. He got Homer. He needed Homer not to quit, not to organize, not to look at the plant's record and go to a lawyer. He got a man whose fear of abandonment was so profound that he would rather stay in a bad situation than risk the upheaval of leaving it. He needed the safety inspector at his most dangerous facility to be the least threatening possible version of a safety inspector. He got exactly that. And all of it was accomplished not through force, not through any overt act of control, but through the removal of one person from a child's life at the age of 6. Mona Simpson was Burns's most efficient act of engineering. Her absence did more to secure his interests than any direct intervention could have managed. Because what Burns understood, with the cold precision of a man who has had a century to study what makes people controllable, is that the damage done to children is not temporary. The damage done to children is structural. It gets built into the architecture of the adult the child becomes. It shapes the walls and the floors and the load-bearing elements of the personality. You can put furniture in the rooms later, different furniture, better furniture, and the rooms can look fine from the outside. But the structure is still what was built during construction. Homer's structure was built in the years after his mother disappeared, and Burns knew what that structure would produce. He knew it the way an architect knows what a building will do under stress, because he had read the blueprints of a child's grief, and he filed them away and waited, and in due course, the grown version of that child showed up at the nuclear plant looking for a job, and Burns hired him, and everything went exactly according to plan. 3 generations of Simpsons. One man's calculation. And Homer, sitting in Sector 7G right now, in this very moment, in the Springfield that exists tonight exactly as it existed yesterday and will exist tomorrow, still doesn't know, still can't see the pattern, still goes to work for the man who stole his childhood every morning, without understanding why it has always felt like something is missing. Because the thing that is missing was taken before Homer had the words to describe it. And the taking was so complete, so early, so total, that Homer has lived his entire life inside the shape of its absence without ever being able to name the shape. That is the cruelest thing Burns ever did. Not the plant, not the pollution, not the money or the power or the manipulation. The most cruel thing Burns ever did was make Homer's loss invisible to Homer himself. Expansion G. Insert after whatever Maggie is planning. She is planning it very carefully. Near end of section 7. The long game Maggie is playing becomes even more interesting when you consider what she has had the opportunity to observe. She has watched Burns operate from inside the family of one of his employees. She has watched Homer go to work every morning and come home every evening and has, presumably, processed what Homer reports about his day, what Homer says at the dinner table, what Homer thinks about his employer and his workplace, and his role in the machinery that keeps the plant running. She has watched Marge hold the family together through everything, has observed, with whatever extraordinary cognitive instrument she is running behind those enormous eyes, the mechanisms by which Marge absorbs stress and converts it into stability. The methods Marge uses to manage Homer's anxieties without feeding them. The way Marge keeps the household functional while the household is constantly threatening to become dysfunctional. She has watched Lisa fight, has seen every campaign Lisa has mounted, and every time it has failed, and every way in which failing has and hasn't changed Lisa. Has observed from her quiet corner what courage costs in this town and what it buys. She has watched Bart, which is perhaps the most instructive observation of all, because Bart is a person who has tried every available method of resisting the systems around him. He has been openly defiant. He has been subversively creative. He has been funny and chaotic and impulsive and occasionally genuinely strategic. He has pushed against every authority he has ever encountered, and Springfield has absorbed all of it. Bart's resistance, for all its energy and creativity and occasional genuine effectiveness, has not fundamentally changed anything about how Springfield works. He is still in the same school with the same teachers in the same town at the same age. His resistance is real, but its effects are local and temporary. Maggie has watched this and drawn conclusions. The conclusion, as the theory goes, is that visible resistance is insufficient. Open intelligence is punishable. Public defiance is manageable. The system knows how to absorb all of these. It has practiced for 36 years. What the system does not know how to handle is a threat it cannot see. A player it doesn't know is playing. A force that has been accumulating information and understanding and capability for 3.5 decades, in perfect silence, in the margins, in the spaces between adult attentiveness, presenting itself as something negligible, something small, something that can be safely ignored. A baby. 36 years of being underestimated. 36 years of watching. 36 years of learning everything there is to learn about the family, the town, the plant, the billionaire, the system, the loop. If Maggie ever decides that the moment to act has come, she will not be caught off guard. She will have prepared, and Springfield, which has had 3.5 decades to prepare as well, will not have seen it coming, because it never does, because that's exactly how Maggie designed it. Expansion H insert after the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. At end of section 8. This pattern of truth as threat is not unique to the Skinner episode, of course. It runs through the show the way the crack runs through the cooling tower, not prominently visible from a distance, clear to anyone who gets close enough to look. Consider what happens to Lisa Simpson in almost any episode that centers on her. Lisa discovers something important, something that the community needs to know, something about the environment, or history, or the political process, or the health and safety of Springfield's residents. She brings this information forward. She presents it clearly and with evidence. She makes the case as well as it can be made, and she is ignored, not always maliciously. Sometimes the community simply isn't interested. Sometimes the people with the power to act on what Lisa has found are more invested in things staying as they are than in the implications of the new information. Sometimes the response is actively hostile, a community that finds the truth inconvenient closing ranks against the person presenting it. But the pattern is always the same. Lisa tells the truth. Springfield doesn't want to hear it. And Lisa, being 8 years old and the daughter of a man who chose the fog, is not in a position to force the issue. She goes home. She practices her saxophone. She wakes up the next morning and the truth she told yesterday is already beginning to recede into the background noise of a town that specializes in not hearing things. This is Springfield's most reliable mechanism. Not violence. Not formal censure. Just the accumulated weight of a community that has decided, collectively, that certain kinds of information are not welcome, and which exercises that decision not through dramatic suppression but through simple indifference. The truth is not forbidden in Springfield, most of the time. It is just consistently, reliably, thoroughly ignored, which turns out to be more effective than forbidding it, because you can fight a law. You can organize against a formal prohibition. You can point at the rule and name it as unjust and build a movement around the naming, but you cannot fight indifference. You cannot organize against a shrug. You cannot make a community care about something it has decided not to care about through persuasion alone if the community's decision was made not through reason but through comfort. Springfield is comfortable. Uncomfortable truths make it less comfortable. And comfort in Springfield is the highest value. Higher than health, higher than justice, higher than the knowledge of what is actually in the water. The principal and the pauper just made this explicit. It made the vote visible. It showed the audience the mechanism by which Springfield's comfort is maintained, and the cost at which it is purchased, and the person who pays that cost. And then it sent the real Seymour Skinner away on a train, and everybody laughed, and the next episode began with everything back in its place. The way it always does. The way it always has. Expansion I insert after ... the legal shield theory. Paragraph in section 9. Let's stay with the geography question a little longer, because there is a detail about Springfield's layout that the theories haven't fully addressed. Springfield has a downtown and a suburban ring and industrial zones and residential neighborhoods. It has a city hall and a police station and multiple churches and multiple bars and a nuclear plant and an elementary school and a high school and what appears to be a university at various points. It has a harbor with boats and a mountain with ski slopes and a forest preserve and a desert that appears when the plot needs it. The show has never offered a map. There have been in-universe maps shown on screen in various episodes, but these maps are always partial, always distorted, always inconsistent with what other episodes have established. The town as depicted in one season does not match the town as depicted in the next. Buildings appear and disappear. The distance between locations changes based on what the scene needs. Evergreen Terrace is never the same number of blocks from anywhere. Springfield is not a place with a map. It is a place that resists mapping. And under the coma theory, this makes perfect sense. Dreams don't have maps. They have the feeling of geography without the precision of it. You know you are going somewhere in a dream. You feel the movement, the distance, the sense of different spaces with different qualities. But if you try to draw the route you just traveled, the drawing would not make sense. The distances would be wrong. The landmarks would be in places that contradict each other. The spatial logic would collapse the moment you tried to impose the rigor of a real map onto the fluid logic of a dreamed space. Springfield's geography is dream geography. It has the emotional truth of a place without the literal truth. You feel like you know where everything is, even though you could not actually draw it. You feel the distance between the house and the plant, the bar and the school, the church and the cemetery. You carry the texture of each location, the quality of the light in Moe's Tavern, the particular institutional fluorescence of Springfield Elementary, the orange glow of the quick E-Mart signs at night. You know these places the way you know places in dreams, completely, incompletely, both at once. And perhaps this is why the geographic mystery has never been resolved and will never be resolved. You cannot solve a dream's geography by looking for it on a real map. The map doesn't exist because the place doesn't exist in the way that places exist. It exists in the way that memory exists. Which is to say, fully present, emotionally complete, spatially inconsistent, and absolutely real to the person inside it. Expansion J insert after the internet. The next time a Simpsons clip from 1,997 lines up perfectly with a headline from 2025. In Section 10, there is one more dimension of the prediction phenomenon worth staying with, because it takes the meta-theory in a direction that feels genuinely strange if you follow it all the way. If The Simpsons shapes the future partly by making certain possibilities feel familiar and therefore more acceptable, then the show has an influence on reality that goes beyond simple satire. It has been for 36 years, quietly preparing the cultural imagination for a series of outcomes that it had identified through the careful reading of existing trends. The preparation was not intentional, in most cases. The writers were making jokes. They were not designing cultural conditioning programs. They were doing what comedy writers do, which is to find the absurd implications of current realities and push them to their logical conclusion for the sake of the laugh. But the effect, across 800 episodes and 36 years of daily life in American culture, has been to normalize a very specific version of the future. A future where corporations are more powerful than governments, where wealth is concentrated in the hands of people who are, in various ways, difficult to hold accountable, where the environment is an ongoing casualty of industrial production that nobody in authority seems sufficiently motivated to stop, where the media is both ubiquitous and unreliable, where ordinary people are subject to systems they don't understand and can't meaningfully influence. The Simpsons has been depicting this future since 1989. And the audience has been watching it and laughing and going to bed and waking up and going to work, and over the course of 36 years, something in the cultural imagination has shifted. The future the show predicted feels, to a generation that grew up watching it, less like a warning and more like a description. Not because the show was right, because the show made the thing it was describing feel inevitable. And things that feel inevitable have a tendency to become so, partly because the feeling of inevitability reduces the motivation to resist them. This is the darkest version of the prediction theory. Not that The Simpsons saw the future, but that by depicting it so fully, so consistently, so entertainingly, for so long, it helped make the future it was depicting feel like the only future available. Springfield is not a warning we didn't heed. Springfield is a story we told ourselves until it felt true. And now here we are, living in it, laughing at the jokes. Expansion K insert. After a tiny old man who dies every few weeks and keeps coming back for more. In Section 11. Hans Mollmann's existence raises a question that the show never poses directly but that the theories make inescapable. What is the threshold in Springfield for something being considered a problem? The town has a three-eyed fish and has had one since season 2. The town has a tire fire that has been burning for as long as anyone can remember and that nobody has ever successfully put out. The town has a nuclear plant with 342 safety violations. The town has an employer who literally glows in the dark after his weekly medical treatments. The town has a tiny man who dies repeatedly and comes back without explanation. And the threshold for any of this becoming a community concern appears to be significantly higher than any of these things have yet managed to reach. This is either a joke about small-town complacency or a portrait of a population whose capacity for alarm has been systematically reduced to a point where almost nothing can trigger it. Both interpretations are available. Both have evidence supporting them. But the Mollmann situation adds a specific wrinkle to the question, because Mollmann's deaths are not private, they are public. They happen in the street, in the park, in the grocery store. Witnesses are present. Characters who exist in the same frame as Mollmann when he dies are presumably aware that he has died. And nobody ever does anything about it. Nobody calls an ambulance. Nobody investigates. Nobody raises the question of why a 31-year-old man appears to be 90 and dies every 3 weeks and then shows up again for more. The community's response to Mollmann is the same as its response to everything else that should be alarming. A shrug. A look away. A willingness to move on before the implications of what was just witnessed have time to fully develop. And then the next thing happens, and the thing after that, and Mollmann is in the background again, alive again, ready to be killed again, and the cycle continues. If this is what the radiation theory produces at the extreme end of the exposure spectrum, the case of maximum biological disruption, then Mollmann is the most urgent argument for taking the contamination seriously. A man who appears to have aged 50 years ahead of schedule and who cannot permanently die is not a charming background character. He is a medical emergency walking around on the streets of Springfield. He is what happens when the contamination is given enough time and enough concentration to fully express itself in a single human body. He is the end point. The direction of travel for everything the plant has been doing to the town, visible in the figure of a tiny old young man who keeps falling down and getting back up. Springfield walks past him every day and thinks nothing of it, the way it thinks nothing of anything, the way it has always thought nothing of anything, because thinking something of it would require the kind of sustained, sequential, connected reasoning that the water has been slowly making impossible for 36 years. Expansion L insert after "It always is" at end of section 12 before final paragraph. One last thing, in the deepest part of this hour, we have been in Springfield together for a long time tonight. We have walked through its streets and sat in its living rooms and stood in the shadow of its cooling towers and looked at its residents with the particular attention that comes from deciding to look rather than just seeing. What you find when you look that way is not what you expected. You expected a cartoon. You found a portrait of a family that is, in the most fundamental way, completely ordinary. Not in spite of everything that is extraordinary about them, the mutations and the improbable resilience and the impossible aging and the secrets and the mysteries, but including all of it. All of it is part of what makes them ordinary. Because ordinariness, real ordinariness, is not the absence of extraordinary things. It is the way extraordinary things accumulate quietly around the edges of daily life until they become the background against which daily life proceeds. Homer's extraordinary resilience is extraordinary only from the outside. From inside his life, he just keeps getting up. He doesn't think of it as remarkable. He thinks of it as Tuesday. Marge's extraordinary patience is extraordinary only from the outside. From inside her life, she just keeps going. She doesn't calculate the weight of what she carries. She simply carries it, the way she always has, the way she always will, the way her character requires. Lisa's extraordinary intelligence is extraordinary only from the outside. From inside her 8-year-old experience, it is a burden as often as it is a gift. She doesn't feel extraordinary. She feels alone. Maggie's extraordinary silence is extraordinary only from the outside. From inside it, she is simply waiting, observing, accumulating, the way she has always done and will always do. And Bart is extraordinary perhaps in the specificity of his ordinariness. He is a 10-year-old boy who wants to be free and can't quite manage it and keeps trying anyway, who pushes against every limit and accepts the consequences and comes back for more, who is, underneath everything, someone who loves his family with an intensity he would never quite admit to out loud. These 5 people, yellow-skinned and four-fingered and frozen in their particular amber of 1,989, have been the most visible family in America for 36 years. And we have watched them, faithfully, because something in them answers something in us. The theories tell us that Springfield is broken. The theories are right. But so is the feeling of warmth when the couch gag plays and the theme music starts. So is the laugh at Homer's noise and the smile at Marge's voice, and the moment in every season where Lisa plays her saxophone in a quiet scene and you feel, briefly, the particular sweetness of a character who keeps hoping in a world that keeps disappointing her. The theories explain the brokenness. The feeling explains why we stay. Both are true. Both have always been true. And on a night like this one, in the quiet hours when the world outside has gone still and the light is low and the only voice is the one you are hearing right now, it is enough to simply know that Springfield is there. Broken and beautiful and frozen and full of people we have loved for 36 years. Waiting for us, the way it always waits. The way it always will. Expansion M, insert additional closing section after final section. Section 13, the things that have no answers. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have examined the radiation, and the coma, and the shooting, and the immortal billionaire, and the missing mother and the silent baby, and the town that voted against the truth, and the impossible geography, and the predictions, and the man who keeps dying, and the neighbor who keeps forgiving. Each of these topics has a theory attached to it. Each theory has evidence. Each piece of evidence is real, pulled from actual episodes that aired on actual television sets in actual living rooms across America across the span of 36 years. But there are things we haven't talked about, things that don't quite fit into any of the frameworks we've been using, things that live in the spaces between the theories, in the gaps that even the most comprehensive analytical framework leaves open. These are the things that truly have no answers, not the ones the show deliberately obscured, or the ones that have fan theories elaborate enough to account for all the evidence, or the ones that have official answers that don't quite satisfy. These are the mysteries that the show didn't seem to know it was making, the ones that emerged from the accumulation of 36 years of storytelling, not because anyone planted them, but because when you run a narrative long enough, certain things become visible that were never designed to be there. Let's start with the question of why Marge stays. This is not an accusation. It is a genuine mystery. Marge Simpson is, within the logic of the show, a woman of remarkable capability. She has demonstrated artistic talent, professional competence in multiple fields, social intelligence that far exceeds her husband's, and an emotional resilience that borders on supernatural. In the episodes that show Marge operating outside her role as Homer's wife and the family's stabilizing center, she is impressive in ways the show doesn't always get credit for depicting. She painted. She bowled at a competitive level. She worked as a real estate agent with genuine skill. She maintained a community arts program. She pursued causes she believed in with a commitment that the community around her rarely matched. She is not a woman without options. And Homer, whom she loves genuinely and completely, is Homer. He is a man who has been, across 36 years, occasionally genuinely romantic and frequently genuinely neglectful. A man who has forgotten anniversaries and pursued self-interest at family expense and required rescue from consequences of his own making more times than anyone should count. The show has depicted the tension in the marriage with honesty. Marge has been tempted to leave, at various points, by men who offered her more consistent attention and more reliable partnership. She has stayed every time. Why? The official answer is love. The show's answer is love, and the show means it. The love between Homer and Marge is not performed. It is one of the most genuine emotional cores in American television comedy. When it works in a way that makes you feel something real. But under the theories, the question becomes stranger. If the coma theory is true and Homer is dreaming, then Marge stays because the dream requires her to. Homer's unconscious mind cannot imagine her leaving because the alternative is too devastating to contemplate. Marge stays in the dream because Homer's brain will not allow the dream to show him what it would look like if she didn't. If the radiation theory is true and the population's reasoning is compromised, then Marge's calculations about her own situation may be affected by the same contamination that affects everyone else's. Her assessment of what is possible, what she deserves, what her options are, may all be running on impaired cognitive hardware. She stays not because she has genuinely weighed all the options, but because the weighing mechanism is not functioning at full capacity. Neither of these explanations is flattering. Neither of them is satisfying, which perhaps means the official answer, love, is the right one. But it is a love that exists inside a system designed to limit the options of everyone within it. And a love that survives because of its context, rather than in spite of it, is a more complicated thing than it appears on the surface. Marge stays, Homer stays, the family stays, the show stays. And the question of why, beneath all the obvious answers, remains one that the theories can gesture at but not quite reach. Now let's talk about a mystery the show has never acknowledged as a mystery. The Quick E-Mart. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon ran the Quick E-Mart for most of the show's run. He worked absurd hours, maintained the store through every crisis and catastrophe that befell Springfield, and represented one of the show's most complex supporting characters across many seasons. His presence was constant, his reliability was a given, and the store he ran served as one of the informal community gathering spaces of Springfield, a function that the show depicted consistently and affectionately. The Quickie Mart sells food and drinks and supplies to a town that has been established, through the radiation theory's evidence, to have contaminated water. This means that everything the Quickie Mart sells that is prepared using local water, every squishy, every hot dog that rotates on those metal rollers under that particular orange light, every coffee that comes from the machine behind the counter, is being prepared with water that has been running through the same pipes that receive water from the same source as everything else in Springfield. The Quickie Mart is not just a convenience store. It is, if the radiation theory is correct, a secondary distribution point for contaminated goods. The coffee is hot and the squishies are cold, and the hot dogs have been rotating under that light for what appears to be a geological epoch. And all of it, every sip and every bite, is made with Springfield water. The residents drink it constantly. They drink the squishies and the coffee and the various beverages from the various coolers, and they eat the various processed things from the various shelves. And then they go home and drink from the tap, and then they go to work and drink the coffee there. There is no escape from the water in Springfield. Every route through daily life passes through the water, in one form or another. And the Quick E-Mart is just one more conduit. This is not a mystery the show has posed. It is a mystery that emerges from the confluence of the show's established facts. The radiation is in the water is in everything. The everything is everywhere. It's not that Apu is complicit. He is probably just as affected as everyone else, just as impaired, just as unable to connect the dots between the plant on the hill and the coffee in the pot. But the dots are there. They are always there, waiting for someone to connect them. Now let's talk about something even quieter. The question of the children who do not appear. Springfield has children, many of them. Bart's classmates at Springfield Elementary form a small supporting cast of their own, recurring faces in the background of school scenes, occasional participants in plots that involve the school or children's activities generally. And across 36 years, these children have not aged either. Milhouse Van Houten is still Bart's best friend, still the same age, still carrying the same unrequited affection for Lisa, still navigating the same complicated relationship with his divorced parents. Nelson Muntz is still the bully with the soft interior. Martin Prince is still the academic overachiever. Ralph Wiggum is still producing sentences that defy the normal rules of language. They are all frozen, just like the Simpson children. But the show has almost never asked what this means for them. Bart's aging problem gets examined because Bart is a main character. His frozen age is examined through the lens of Homer's coma, or the radiation, or the floating timeline, because it is his frozen age and he is someone the show has invested decades of narrative attention in. Milhouse's frozen age is not examined. Martin's, Nelson's, Ralph's, they are frozen too. They are all frozen. Every child in Springfield has been the same age for 36 years, which means whatever is happening to the Simpson children is happening to every child in Springfield. The radiation doesn't target the Simpsons specifically. The coma dream doesn't only preserve Homer's children. The collective denial that Springfield maintains doesn't just protect the main family from the passage of time, it protects everyone. Every child in Springfield is trapped at their current age. Every parent in Springfield is watching children who never grow up. Every teacher in Springfield has been teaching the same students, the same grade for 36 years. The mystery is not specific to The Simpsons. The mystery is Springfield. All of it. Every resident, every child, every background character who appears in the grocery store and the park and the town hall. All of them are locked inside the same impossibility. All of them subject to the same whatever it is that keeps the loop running. And none of them, as far as the show has ever shown us, have noticed. Not one Springfield parent has looked at their child on the morning of what should be the child's 11th birthday and thought, wait, something is wrong here. Not one. The collective blindness is total, or the collective awareness is total, and everyone has decided, quietly and unanimously, not to speak of it. The vote is always happening in Springfield, even when no one is calling the vote. Even when the thing being voted on is never named, the motion passes. The truth stays where it is, and the children remain the ages they were, forever. Or at least for as long as the loop keeps running, which appears to be forever. Now a smaller thing, but one that has always caught at something in the corner of the mind. The gravestones in the Springfield Cemetery. The show has visited the cemetery across dozens of episodes. Characters have been buried there. Characters have visited the graves of people they have lost. Mona Simpson visited the grave that turned out to belong to Walt Whitman. The cemetery is an established location in Springfield's geography, and like all established locations in Springfield, it has the quality of a place that has been there for a long time and will be there for a long time. But consider what the cemetery contains in the context of everything we have been discussing tonight. If the radiation theory is true and the contamination has extended the lives of Springfield's residents through biological mutations that disrupt normal aging processes, then the people in the Springfield Cemetery died despite that protection. They found a way to die in a town that appears to be remarkably resistant to death. How? What does it take to permanently die in Springfield? Molman dies repeatedly and keeps coming back. Homer has survived things that should have killed him dozens of times. Burns has been managing his own mortality for over a century. Even the dog, Santa's little helper, has demonstrated a resilience beyond what normal animal biology would suggest. And yet the cemetery is full. There are headstones. There are names. There are people who went into the ground in Springfield and stayed there, without the benefit of the resurrection that Molman enjoys, and the medical infrastructure that Burns maintains, and the coma dream protection that possibly keeps Homer alive. Who are these people? What made them different from the others? The show never asks. The cemetery just sits there on the edge of town, under those particular Springfield clouds, full of people who found some way to be permanently absent from a town that seems designed to keep everyone present. The permanent departed of Springfield. The ones who broke the loop and stayed broken. There are no answers here, only the stones, and the names, and the particular weight that gravestones carry in a town that has forgotten everything else, where time passes over the rest of the population without leaving marks. The gravestones are the only places in Springfield where time is permanently recorded. The dates carved into them are the only evidence, in the whole of this frozen town, that time has actually been passing. Everything else resets. The gravestones don't, which may be the most honest thing in Springfield, and the most lonely. Now, let's consider one more mystery, the one that is perhaps the most personal and the most difficult to frame as a theory. The question of what The Simpsons has done to the people who grew up with it. There is a generation, now in their 30s and 40s and early 50s, who grew up with this show from the beginning, who were children when it premiered, and are now adults who have children of their own. Who have watched this family across the full span of their own lives, from the couch of their parents' house to the couch of their own house. What has it done to them? This is a question the prediction phenomenon gestures at but doesn't quite reach. The prediction phenomenon asks whether the show shaped culture by making certain futures feel familiar and therefore more acceptable. This question is more intimate than that. What has it meant to grow up with a fictional family that never changes? To watch the same parents across 36 years? To carry The Simpsons through childhood and adolescence and young adulthood and middle age, while The Simpsons themselves stay exactly where they were? There is something strange about it when you hold it at the right angle. The audience has aged. The audience has changed. The audience has had experiences that Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie cannot have had because the audience was allowed to grow up and the Simpsons were not. And yet the relationship continues. The audience, now in its 40s, still watches a 10-year-old boy pull pranks on a man in his mid-30s, still watches an 8-year-old girl carry the weight of intelligence in a world that doesn't value it, still watches a baby sit in her high chair and watch everything. The power dynamic has shifted in ways nobody quite discusses. The audience is now older than Homer and Marge. The audience has children who are older than Bart and Lisa. And The Simpsons remain frozen at the ages they were when the audience was watching from the floor of a parent's living room. What does it mean to watch a family you have outgrown? What does it mean to be older than the parents of the family you grew up watching? The show doesn't address this. The show cannot address this, because addressing it would require acknowledging that time has passed, and the loop doesn't allow that. But the audience knows. The audience carries it. The strange and private knowledge that the family on the screen has stayed exactly the same, while the person watching has become someone their childhood self wouldn't entirely recognize. The Simpsons remains the family from 1989. The audience has become something else. And the gap between them, widening every year, is one of the strangest things that long-running television produces. A relationship that the fiction keeps frozen, while the real party to the relationship keeps changing. The audience has been grieving The Simpsons for decades, in a way. Grieving the version of the show that existed when they were young. The version that felt new and surprising and completely unlike anything else. The version that made them feel like they had found something that understood them. That version is not gone. It is still there, in the episodes from the early seasons, accessible whenever you want to return to it. But it is gone in the sense that you cannot watch it for the first time again. You cannot bring back the version of yourself that encountered it without expectation or familiarity, or the complicated weight of 36 years of watching. That version of you is the one that's in the cemetery. The dates are carved, the time is recorded, and The Simpsons are still exactly where they were, waiting for you to sit down and watch. The way they always have been, the way they always will be. And perhaps that is the final answer to the final question. We keep watching not because the show still surprises us, though it sometimes does. Not because it still feels new, though in its better moments it still manages something fresh. We keep watching because returning to Springfield is a way of returning to an earlier version of ourselves. A version that sat on a different couch, in a different house, with different people in the rooms around it, and watched the Yellow family stumble through another episode and felt, for half an hour, like the world was manageable. We keep watching because the Springfield of our childhood is one of the few places that still exists at the age it was when we left it. Everything else we grew up with has changed. The houses, the neighborhoods, the faces, the people. Springfield has not. It is still there, still yellow, still frozen, still running on contaminated water and cracked cooling towers, and the dreams of a man who went to sleep in April 1993, and the silence of a baby who is thinking things nobody suspects, and the devotion of a woman who keeps showing up with the treatments that keep the old man alive. Still running, still home, and as long as we keep watching, as long as we keep choosing Springfield over the dark and the quiet and the awareness that time has passed and we are different people now than we were when this all began, the loop keeps going. The Simpsons will be on next week, and the week after, and the week after that. Frozen and familiar and full of mysteries with no answers. Full of questions we will keep asking, full of a family we will keep loving, for as long as the lights are on. And the lights, in Springfield, are always on. The plant sees to that. Thank you for staying this long. Springfield will be here in the morning exactly as you left it. Sleep well. Additional expansion. Section 3. The coma and what it means. There is something worth adding to the coma theory that rarely gets discussed, which is the specific texture of what Homer's dream produces when you look at it as a product of a particular kind of mind. A coma is not sleep. This distinction matters. Sleep produces dreams that are relatively coherent, narratively structured, emotionally resonant in ways the dreamer can sometimes follow and remember. A coma produces something different. A coma brain is not resting. It is fighting. It is a mind that has been severed from its sensory inputs and its motor outputs and has been left to generate its own reality using whatever internal resources it has available, while simultaneously managing the enormous biological task of trying to heal itself and return to consciousness. The dreams, if you can call them that emerge from a coma brain are not the orderly narratives of sleep. They are more like a simulation running on damaged hardware. The logic is approximate. The physics are negotiable. The rules that govern cause and effect are maintained most of the time, but not always. And when they fail, the failure is absorbed without comment because there is no external reference point to flag the inconsistency. Now watch an episode of The Simpsons from after 1993 with this in mind. The logic is approximate. The physics are negotiable. The rules that govern cause and effect are maintained most of the time, but not always, and when they fail, the failure is absorbed without comment, because no character within the show has an external reference point to flag the inconsistency. The mirror is not exact, but it is close enough to make you pause. Homer's coma brain is not producing a realistic simulation of his life. It is producing the best approximation it can manage with the tools available to it, which are Homer's memories, Homer's understanding of the people he loves, Homer's sense of how the world works, filtered through 55 points of IQ, and the ongoing biological disruption of being in a coma. The result is a world that feels real from inside it. That has the emotional truth of real life even when it lacks the physical truth. That generates situations and characters and relationships that carry genuine weight, even when the situations are physically impossible and the characters are doing things no real person would do. It is the best Homer can manage. And it is, if you think about it this way, an act of extraordinary love. He is keeping his family alive in the only space available to him. He is maintaining them, as faithfully as he can, in the medium of his own unconscious mind. He is being the father and the husband he always wanted to be, in the place where he has complete creative control, which is the dream. And the dream is imperfect. Of course it is. The physics are wrong. The logic fails sometimes. The plots become increasingly elaborate and removed from any recognizable reality as the years go on and the brain's resources are further strained. But the emotional core holds. Through everything, through all 32 years of increasingly surreal storylines and celebrity cameos and impossible adventures, the emotional core holds. Homer loves his family. The dream knows nothing else as certainly as it knows this, and it builds everything around it. Now consider what the coma theory does to one specific category of episode. There are, across the show's run, many episodes in which Homer does something genuinely terrible, and the family suffers for it, and then, somehow, everything is resolved and forgiven by the end. Homer behaves selfishly, or negligently, or cruelly in ways that real consequences should follow from, and the consequences either do not come or come briefly and then dissolve. In a waking life, this would be concerning. In a marriage, this pattern of behavior without lasting consequence would be a serious problem. In a dream generated by the person who sometimes behaves badly, it makes a different kind of sense. Homer's dream does not punish Homer permanently for Homer's failures, because Homer's dream is built from Homer's hope, not Homer's guilt. It generates consequences, briefly, because Homer knows that consequences are part of how reality works. But it resolves them. It heals them. It returns the family to equilibrium, because the dream's primary purpose is to keep the family together, and permanent consequences of Homer's worst moments would work against that purpose. The dream forgives Homer the way Homer wishes he could be forgiven. Not because he deserves it, but because the dreaming mind is not a court. It is a place where the things you most deeply want can be true, and what Homer most deeply wants is to be okay in the eyes of his family. The dream gives him that, again and again, in every episode, across 32 years. It gives him a family that stays. Additional expansion. Section 4, the shooting and its aftermath. Let us also spend a moment with something the Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery reveals about the town of Springfield that extends well beyond the specific question of who pulled the trigger. The shooting of Mr. Burns is a moment where Springfield had an opportunity to reckon with what Burns had actually been doing to the community. He had stolen oil from beneath the school. He had bankrupted a local business. He had destroyed the retirement home. He had blocked out the sun. These were not minor offenses. They were the actions of a man who had decided, with perfect clarity and complete impunity, that the comfort and the livelihoods and the literal daily light of an entire community were less important than his own financial interests. And when someone shot him, the town's response was not to reflect on the conditions that had made someone desperate enough to do it. It was to launch a criminal investigation. The crime that was investigated was the shooting of Burns. The crimes that created the conditions for the shooting were never investigated at all. Nobody charged Burns with anything. Nobody opened an inquiry into the oil theft, or the bankrupting of Moe's Tavern, or the destruction of the retirement home. Nobody asked whether blocking out the sun qualified as some form of criminal conduct. The legal apparatus of Springfield, such as it is, swung into action to find the person who had hurt Burns, and paid no attention whatsoever to the catalog of harms Burns had inflicted on the town before the shooting. The richest man in Springfield was the victim. Everyone he had victimized was a suspect. This is, in miniature, a precise portrait of how power operates in a place like Springfield. The law exists to protect those who can afford protection. The investigation exists to restore order to those who benefit from the existing order. The crime that matters is the one done to the powerful man, not the many crimes done by the powerful man. Chief Wiggum's investigation was not a comedy of incompetence. Or, not only that, it was an accurate depiction of where the investigative resources of Springfield were going to be directed and why. Of course, the police investigated the shooting. Of course, they did not investigate what led to it. That is not how things work in Springfield. That is not how things work in any town where the economic center of the community is also above accountability. And the answer the investigation arrived at, Maggie, was the answer that made everyone most comfortable. The case was closed. Burns survived. His crimes remained unexamined. The town moved on. And Burns, recovered and as formidable as ever, went back to running the plant and the economy and the system that made all of it possible. Nothing changed. The shooting changed nothing, which is the most Springfield thing of all. Additional expansion. Section 5. Burns as system. Consider Burns not as a person but as a system. He is, of course, a character. One of the great comic villains in American television history, with a voice and a posture and a collection of references and obsessions that make him one of the most recognizable figures in the show. But he is also functioning within the logic of Springfield, something more than a person. He is the mechanism by which Springfield maintains itself. Without Burns, there is no plant. Without the plant, there is no power. Without power, there is no economy. Without an economy, there is no town. The causal chain runs directly from Burns to everything else in Springfield, and it runs in one direction only. Burns depends on nothing in Springfield. Springfield depends on Burns for everything. This is not a coincidence. Burns built it this way. A century of deliberate economic engineering, of purchasing competitors and closing alternatives, and ensuring that no other source of power or employment could establish itself in Springfield with enough security to threaten his monopoly. The dependency is not natural. It is manufactured. It was manufactured specifically so that Burns could never be held accountable, because holding Burns accountable would mean destroying the infrastructure that the entire town depends on for its survival. He is too big to fail, in the most literal sense possible. Not in the financial meaning of the phrase, though that applies as well. In the physical, material, day-to-day meaning. The lights in Springfield stay on because Burns keeps them on. The paychecks in Springfield are signed because Burns signs them. The economy exists because Burns chose to build it and has chosen so far to maintain it. And he has used this fact, this fundamental dependency, as both shield and weapon for as long as anyone in Springfield can remember. As a shield, you cannot shut down the plant because the plant is what keeps the lights on. You cannot demand accountability from Burns because Burns is what stands between the town and darkness. As a weapon, anyone who challenges Burns challenges the infrastructure. Anyone who organizes against him organizes against their own livelihood. Anyone who threatens to expose the violations, the contamination, the crimes, the history, is threatening the economic foundation of their own community, and the community will not thank them for it. This is how the system protects itself, not through force, primarily, through dependency. The most elegant kind of control is the kind where the controlled party would not choose freedom even if it were offered, because freedom would mean losing the things the control provides. Burns understood this. He has spent a century making it true. And Springfield has spent a century being the proof. Additional expansion. Section 7 Maggie's Choices. There is another dimension to Maggie's situation worth sitting with in the quiet of this hour. She is, as the theory proposes, the most strategically intelligent member of her family. She has made a calculated decision to present herself as something small and helpless and unworthy of close attention. She maintains this presentation with a consistency and discipline that would be remarkable in an adult, and is genuinely extraordinary in a figure who cannot walk reliably. But consider the cost. Intelligence that cannot be expressed is intelligence that is, in some meaningful sense, imprisoned. Maggie has abilities that nobody around her suspects. She has understanding that goes far beyond what anyone attributes to her. She has, presumably, thoughts and observations and analyses and feelings that she cannot share because sharing them would break the cover that keeps her safe. She watches Homer stumble through life. She watches him make choices she can see the consequences of before he makes them. She watches him walk into situations that are going to hurt him, and she cannot warn him, because warning him would mean revealing that she is capable of warning, which would mean revealing that she is capable of much more than warning. She watches Lisa fight the same battles over and over, watching her sister bring truth to a town that has no use for it and be dismissed again and again. She could help Lisa. She has the intelligence to be a formidable ally. But being a formidable ally would require being known as formidable, and being known as formidable is the one thing Maggie cannot afford. So she watches. She lets Homer make his mistakes. She lets Lisa fight her losing fights. She lets the family navigate a world that is harder than it needs to be, and she says nothing, and she waits, and she keeps the cover intact. Because the cover is more important than the help she could offer right now. She is playing a longer game than any of them can see. And the cost of that game is a form of loneliness that the show has never quite articulated directly. The loneliness of a mind that cannot be known. Of a person who cannot be fully present in her own family because being fully present would make her visible, and visible is the one thing she has decided not to be. Maggie is alone in a way that none of the other Simpsons are alone, despite being surrounded by people who love her and whom she loves in return. She is alone in the space between what she is and what she allows anyone to see. And she has been in that space for 36 years, still watching, still waiting, still, in her way, completely alone. Additional expansion. Section 9 Geography and Memory. There is one more thing about Springfield's geography worth sitting with as this night goes on. Every American who has watched this show carries a mental map of Springfield that is completely real and entirely imaginary at the same time. You know the house on Evergreen Terrace. You know the layout of the rooms, the way the kitchen connects to the living room, the particular quality of the light in the living room in the early evening. You know the walk to the Quickie Mart, even though you have never walked it. You know the drive to the plant, the way the cooling towers come into view, the parking lot where things have happened. You carry this geography in your mind with the same intimacy that you carry the geography of places you actually lived. More intimately, in some cases, because you have spent more time in Springfield than in some places you have physically been. And yet you could not draw the map. You know the places, but not the distances. You know the landmarks, but not the routes between them. The geography of Springfield exists in your memory as a collection of locations rather than as a spatial reality, and this is exactly how the show presents it. Scenes happen in places. Characters move between places. But the connective tissue, the actual geography that would make Springfield a real location, has always been missing. Springfield is made of moments, not distances. It is a place you know through feeling, not through measurement. And this is why it is impossible to locate on a map, because it was never built to be a real place. It was built to be a felt place. A place that exists in the emotional register of memory rather than the physical register of geography. You do not visit Springfield. You remember it, even the first time. Additional expansion. Section 11 Ned Flanders and What Goodness Costs. The question that the Ned Flanders situation ultimately poses is one that the show has been circling for 36 years without quite landing on it directly. What does Springfield do to goodness? Because Ned is not the only good person in Springfield. Springfield has produced, across its run, a number of genuinely decent characters, people who try, in their various ways, to be better than the circumstances around them encourage, people who give more than they receive. People who care about things that the community has decided not to care about. And the show's treatment of these characters has been remarkably consistent. The good people of Springfield suffer. Not always dramatically, not always in ways that constitute punishment, but they suffer. They are disappointed, they are overlooked, they are occasionally destroyed by the indifference or the active hostility of the community around them. And the community's relationship with their suffering is, with some notable exceptions, relatively comfortable. It watches the good people suffer with the same relaxed attention it brings to everything else. Because suffering is also part of the furniture of Springfield. It is something that happens to people here the way the tire fire happens and the three-eyed fish happens and the plant goes on leaking. It is part of the texture of life in this town. And the town has developed the same relationship to the suffering of its better members that it has developed to all its other uncomfortable realities. It does not look directly at it. It moves on. Ned goes to church, gets nothing back. Goes again, gets nothing back, goes again. This is not a story about faith being tested and surviving the test. This is a story about a system that does not care about faith, that rewards compliance regardless of the moral framework behind it, that has no mechanism for acknowledging goodness, because goodness is not a currency the system trades in. The system trades in dependency, in fear, in the kind of need that keeps people showing up for work at a plant with 342 violations because the alternative is worse. Ned's goodness is real. The show never suggests otherwise. His faith is genuine. His kindness is genuine. His love for his children and his community, and even, bafflingly, for Homer, is genuine. And the system looks right through it, because the system has no use for genuine goodness. It has use for compliant people, and Ned, conditioned into compliance before he was old enough to understand what was being done to him, is compliant. His goodness is real, but his compliance is also real, and it is the compliance, not the goodness, that the system recognizes and responds to. Homer is compliant through damage. Ned is compliant through programming. The system treats them both the same. One of them keeps his job. The other one goes to church. And God in Springfield talks to Homer. Additional expansion. Section 12. The audience's loop. Let us be honest about something in this final hour. The theories we have discussed tonight are not neutral analytical exercises. They are not merely clever ways of reading a television show more carefully. They are, at some level, a response to something the audience has felt about The Simpsons for decades and never quite been able to name. The feeling that the show knows something. That behind the jokes and the characters and the endlessly inventive surface of 36 years of storytelling, there is a layer of awareness that the show itself sometimes seems to pull back from. A depth that gets glimpsed in certain episodes and then covered over again, the way you might close a door on a room that has more in it than you were ready to see. The theories are a way of returning to that door and keeping it open long enough to see what is inside. And what is inside is not what the show officially says is inside. The show officially says it is a comedy, a long-running animated comedy about a dysfunctional but loving family in a fictional American town. That is the official description. That is what the press releases say, and what the awards shows recognize, and what the creators describe in interviews. But the theories say something different. The theories say that The Simpsons is a portrait of a family, a town, a system, a country, of the way power operates in communities that depend on the powerful, of the way communities decide what they will and will not see, of the way individuals are shaped by the things done to them before they were old enough to resist, of the way time works on people, and the way some people find ways to escape the working of time, and the enormous cost of that escape to everyone around them, of the way a man in a hospital bed might spend 30 years holding on to the only thing that ever made his life feel worth living, of the way a baby might spend 30 years watching and waiting for the moment when speaking will change something, of the way a woman might spend 30 years being good in a town that has no use for goodness, of the way a town might spend 30 years choosing the lie over the truth over and over, with a consistency and a deliberateness that eventually stops looking like weakness and starts looking like strategy. The theories say all of this is in the show, and the show, for its part, has never quite denied it. It has said the coma theory is not true. It has not said that Springfield is not a contamination zone. It has not explained why nobody ages. It has not accounted for the tonal shift. It has not addressed the sundial clue or Homer's confession or the real Seymour Skinner or the question of why God speaks to Homer and not to Ned. It has just kept going, episode after episode. Couch gag after couch gag, season after season after season, running the loop, keeping the lights on, making sure that when you sit down on a Sunday night and the music starts and the camera swoops over Springfield toward the house on Evergreen Terrace, everything is exactly where you left it. Homer is coming home. Marge is in the kitchen. Bart is somewhere he probably should not be. Lisa is playing her saxophone. Maggie is in her high chair, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting. The loop runs, Springfield holds, and we watch, as we always have, as we probably always will, because this strange and broken and beautiful town is, in some way we have never quite been able to explain, home. Not a home we grew up in, not a real home, but a feeling of home. The particular warmth of a familiar place, unchanged, waiting for you, exactly as it was the last time you left it. You can always go back to Springfield. You can always sit down on that couch. You can always let the chaos begin and know, before it does, that by the end of the episode, everything will be fine. It will always be fine in Springfield. The radiation sees to that. The dream sees to that. The collective vote sees to that. The treatments and the deals and the silence of a baby who has decided to wait all see to that. Everything fine. Everything together. Everyone home. The loop keeps running. And tonight, as you drift off, as the theories settle into the background and the images of Springfield soften at the edges and the Simpsons take their places on the couch in the house on Evergreen Terrace, let that be the last thing you take with you, not the radiation, not the mysteries, not the questions without answers or the answers without proof, just the family, just the couch. Just the particular warm impossibility of a world where nothing changes and nobody leaves, and the kids are always the ages they were, and the beer is always cold, and the lamp in the living room throws that same warm light it has been, throwing since December of 1989. Sleep well. Springfield will be here in the morning. It always is. That is the whole point. Final expansion. The things that persist. There is a particular kind of question that only very long-running things can generate. Not the questions you ask in the first few years, when the novelty is still present and the mystery is fresh, and every new episode adds to a story that is still actively building itself. Those questions are easy. They emerge naturally from the experience of watching something new. What will happen next? Where is this going? Who are these people really? The questions that only very long-running things can generate are different. They emerge from duration rather than novelty. From the particular sensation of having been in the presence of something long enough that it has become part of the background of your life, and then one day looking at it properly, as if for the first time, and realizing that it is stranger than you had been allowing yourself to see. The Simpsons has generated these questions for 36 years. And the answers, as we have explored tonight, are stranger and richer and more morally complex than the surface of the show has ever quite let on. The radiation is real, within the show's own internal logic. The evidence for it is not hidden. It is stated plainly, depicted directly, and returned to across hundreds of episodes with a consistency that suggests the writers know exactly what they are working with even when the audience does not. The coma is possible, perhaps more than possible, perhaps the most elegant single explanation for everything that has always seemed slightly wrong about the post-season 4 Simpsons. The tonal shift, the aging freeze, the escalating implausibility of the plots, the celebrity flood, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, all of it explained by one event that the show depicted and then moved past without fully examining. The shooting was not solved, or was solved in a way that raises more questions than it answers. The contest nobody won, the alternate endings, the sundial clue that the victim himself described as meaningless, Homer's unexamined confession, the final shot of a baby reenacting a shooting alone in an empty room. These are not the elements of a mystery that has been cleanly resolved. They are the elements of a mystery that was closed rather than solved, in a town that specializes in exactly that distinction. Burns is too old, and his longevity is not natural, and the mechanism that keeps him alive is also the mechanism that is slowly poisoning the town he owns. And he knows this, and he has always known this, and he has made a calculation that the benefits of his continued existence outweigh the costs of the contamination, and Springfield has never had the tools to argue otherwise because Springfield runs on Burns's electricity. Mona Simpson fought back and was destroyed for it. Homer carries the wreckage without being able to see its shape. 3 generations of a family systematically engineered into a configuration that serves one man's interests, and the engineering was so precise and so early that the people inside it cannot recognize it as engineering. Maggie is watching. Armin Tamzarian is still wearing Seymour Skinner's name. Springfield is still floating between states on an unlocatable map. And the timeline is still floating, frozen at a moment that the show began and has maintained ever since, against all the pressures of time and change and the accumulating weight of 36 years of stories that should have moved these characters forward. None of these things are mysteries the show planted with the intention of answering them. They emerged from the accumulated storytelling the way all patterns emerge from long-running things, unbidden, unintended in most cases, and more revealing for being unintended. The show did not mean to build a portrait of a contaminated town. It meant to build a funny backdrop for a comedy about a family. The contamination emerged because when you run a comedy about a nuclear plant for 36 years, the nuclear plant becomes real in a way that the writers of the first season could not have anticipated. The show did not mean to build a coma theory. It meant to produce a clip show with a dramatic frame. The coma theory emerged because one episode, viewed in the context of the 32 years of episodes that followed it, suggests something that the one episode, viewed alone, does not. The show did not mean to produce an unsolvable mystery. It meant to produce the most talked-about summer cliffhanger in the history of animated television. The mystery became unsolvable because the writers constructed it from the outside in, choosing an answer first and building the clues backward, and the seams show if you look at them long enough. These accidents, these unintended emergences, these patterns that appeared without being planned, are perhaps the most honest things about the show. They are what The Simpsons actually is, as opposed to what it intended to be. It intended to be a comedy. It became a portrait. It intended to make you laugh. It made you feel something harder to name. It intended to run for a season or two and then end, the way things end. Instead, it ran for 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, and became so embedded in the culture that its jokes became part of the language, and its characters became more real to some people than some real people, and its town became more familiar than some towns where people have actually lived. And in all that time, across all that running, it accumulated. It accumulated detail and contradiction and mystery and evidence and the quiet weight of 1,000 things that were shown once and never quite explained. It accumulated until it became something larger than a comedy. Something that warranted spending an evening with. Something that rewarded the kind of attention we have been giving it tonight. 36 years. Nearly 800 episodes. Millions of people who grew up with it and carried it forward into adult lives it did not depict. A town that cannot be located, a family that cannot age, a system that cannot be held accountable, a mystery that cannot be solved, a dream that cannot end. This is Springfield. This is what we found when we looked. And now, in the deepest part of this night, as the theories settle and the questions quiet and the images of that yellow family on that familiar couch begin to soften at the edges, take this with you. You looked. You saw something real. You spent time with a show that has been holding more than it lets on for longer than most of its audience has been alive, and you saw a little of what it has been holding. That is enough for one night. Sleep well. Springfield is still there when you close your eyes. The plant is still running. The lights are still on. The family is still on the couch. And Maggie is still in her high chair, still watching, still waiting, still carrying everything she knows. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous, patient eyes, behind 36 years of silence, something is thinking. Sleep well. A note on the mysteries that have no answers. We said at the start that some of these mysteries have official answers that do not quite satisfy. Some have no official answers at all. And some, the ones we have been circling all night without quite arriving at, are not mysteries the show knows it has created. They are mysteries that emerged from the accumulation of time, from the particular way that a long-running story eventually begins to reveal things about itself that its makers never intended to reveal. The Simpsons is full of these unintended revelations. The way Homer's relationship with his father quietly contains the whole history of what Abe knew and chose not to tell. The way the show's depictions of Lisa's isolation, repeated across dozens of episodes in dozens of different contexts, add up to a portrait of what it costs to be the smartest and most idealistic person in a room that does not want those things. The way Marge's patience, episode after episode, begins to look less like a character trait and more like a choice she has to keep making, and the effort of that continuous choosing is visible in the small moments between the larger comedy. These are not mysteries in the conventional sense. There is no answer to find. There is only the slow accumulation of recognition that comes from watching something long enough to see the shapes beneath the surface. And perhaps that is the most honest thing to say about all the mysteries we have explored tonight. Some of them have answers. Some of those answers are the show's official position, and some of those answers are the theories that fans have constructed from the show's own evidence. Both kinds of answers are legitimate. Both illuminate something real. But the deepest mysteries, the ones that most reward the kind of slow, patient attention that belongs to a night like this one, are the ones that do not resolve, the ones that stay open, that keep generating new angles and new questions the more time you spend with them. Why does nobody age? Because the radiation altered their biology. Because Homer is dreaming. Because Springfield votes against time. Because Burns proved that aging is negotiable for anyone with sufficient resources. Because we will not let them. Because we need them to stay exactly where they are. Because otherwise the show ends. Because otherwise we have to admit that 36 years have passed. All of these answers are true. None of them is complete. Where is Springfield? Everywhere. Nowhere. Oregon, briefly, until the show took the answer back. In the state that starts with a vowel, in the north and the south and the heartland and the coast, inside Homer's sleeping mind, assembled from every American landscape he ever encountered. Behind the legal shield of a jurisdiction that will not stay fixed. Wherever you grew up, if you grew up in America, because it was designed to feel like your town, and it does. Who shot Mr. Burns? Maggie. Maybe, probably, the show says so. The evidence is insufficient. Homer said it was him, once, and nobody investigated. The alternate endings exist. The sundial was meaningless according to the person it was supposed to indicate. The contest was not won. The real shooter, whoever it was, has been walking the streets of Springfield for 30 years, unpunished, unacknowledged, protected by an official answer that is convenient enough to stick even if it is not quite right. These questions do not close. They stay open, they stay interesting, they stay the way good questions stay, which is present, ready to be returned to, unchanged by the passing of time. Because in Springfield, time does not pass. And the questions, like the town itself, remain exactly as they were, waiting for you to come back, ready to be asked again. The plant is running, the lights are on, the family is on the couch. And somewhere in the house on Evergreen Terrace, in a room that the camera has never quite fully entered, a baby is sitting in the dark with her pacifier and her enormous eyes, thinking thoughts nobody suspects and making plans nobody can see. And the loop keeps running, as it always has, as it always will. Good night. The last thing about Springfield. There is one thing we have not said tonight, and it deserves to be said before this ends. The Simpsons is, at its core, a love story. Not a romantic love story, though Homer and Marge's relationship contains genuine romance alongside everything else. It is a love story about a family. About the particular, complicated, unchosen love that holds a family together even when everything else is working against it. The radiation, the coma, the corrupt billionaire, the missing mother, the contaminated water, the cracked cooling towers, the floating timeline, the collective amnesia, the vote to expel the truth. All of these forces work against the family, and the family holds. Not because the forces are not real, they are real. The show has spent 36 years demonstrating that they are real. The family holds because Homer loves them, because Marge loves them, because Bart, underneath the chaos and the pranks and the eternal 10-year-old defiance, loves his sister and his parents and his dog and his town, because Lisa loves them, even when they make loving them difficult, which is frequently, because Maggie, silent in her high chair, watching everything, is watching from inside a love she cannot express in words, but that is present in every scene she inhabits. The family holds because love is the one thing in Springfield that the contamination has not damaged, the one thing the coma has not distorted, the one thing the collective denial has not voted away, the one thing Burns's engineering has not been able to reach. He broke Homer in certain ways. He took Homer's mother and Homer's potential and Homer's ability to see the pattern of his own suffering, but he did not take Homer's love for his children. That is still there, intact, 36 years in, as strong as it was in the first episode when Homer adopted a greyhound and brought it home to make Christmas work. That is still there. And if the coma theory is true, it is the thing that has been sustaining the dream. The dream runs on Homer's love for his family the way the plant runs on nuclear fuel. The love is what keeps the simulation going when the hardware is failing. The love is what ensures that by the end of every episode, every season, every decade, the family is still together on the couch on Evergreen Terrace. The love is what Springfield cannot take from them, no matter how long it tries. And that, in the end, is why we keep watching. Not for the mysteries, not for the theories, not even for the jokes, though the jokes are often very good. We keep watching because the love is real. Even in a cartoon, even in a floating timeline, even inside a contaminated town, in an unlocatable state, inside the dream of a man who has been in a hospital bed since 1993, the love is real. You can feel it. You have always been able to feel it. That is why Springfield is home. Not because it is a good place to live, which by most reasonable measures it is not, but because home is not defined by whether a place is good. Home is defined by whether someone there loves you. And in Springfield, in the house on Evergreen Terrace, in the particular amber of 1989, that the show has maintained and will probably always maintain, someone there loves you. Homer loves them, and they love him back. That is the story. That has always been the story. The rest is Springfield. And Springfield, as we have seen tonight, is a great deal more than it appears to be. But the heart of it, the thing at the center of all the mysteries and the theories and the accumulated weight of 36 years of storytelling, is simple. A family, on a couch, in a house, in a town, together, every Sunday night, as they always have been, as they always will be. For as long as the loop keeps running, and the loop in Springfield runs forever, sleep well,